Chapter 581. Bang. A few rocks soared into the sky from the smoke and dust, and a burst of violent coughing sounded out. Damn, I was almost buried alive. Fortunately, I was lucky enough, and the mountain-shattering meteor hammer was powerful enough so I was able to rush out of the sky pit. Sinusaurus muttered to himself with lingering fear. When the smoke and dust dissipated, Sinusaurus saw a person standing in front of him. He could not help but be startled and exclaim, "Why are you alone? Where's third brother?" Martial looked at the ruins of the sky pit. Do Long immediately looked down at his feet and was dumbstruck. "You're saying that OL3 was buried alive?" Martial did not comment, but his expression had already answered this question. She had originally thought that Tang Zheng would definitely rush out unscathed, but reality proved that she was wrong. If he's dead, then what about master and mistress? She panicked and immediately rushed towards the ruins, trying to break through the layers of obstacles to save Tang Zheng. Suddenly, a loud sound rang out as a huge mountain rock soared into the sky. Sinusaurus screamed and immediately jumped out of the ruins, looking at this scene in disbelief. So. Two figures soared into the sky along with the huge rock. Sword lights clashed in midair, causing intense sparks to fly. Bang, bang, bang. A loud sound rang out, and the two of them were like two huge rocks smashing into the ground, sending pieces of gravel flying. They stood facing each other, their eyes shining as they looked at each other, their gazes not friendly. "Your sword technique is actually so powerful," the successor of the sword pavilion exclaimed. He had never seen such a powerful sword technique in his life, and he really did not know when such a powerful sword technique had appeared in this world. Tang Zheng chuckled, "You're not bad either. Someone from the sword pavilion? I presume that the sword pavilion is related to the famous sword god?" Martial looked at Tang Zheng in astonishment, marveling at his reasoning ability. He actually guessed all of this from the sword pavilion and this person's sword technique. The successor of the sword pavilion was also surprised and asked, "Who are you? Why do you know so much?" Of course, Tang Zheng didn't just rely on his deduction. When Tianquanzi had fought with Sword God, he had mentioned it to him. Therefore, he knew how powerful Sword God's swordsmanship was. Although he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he still felt a sense of familiarity with the swordsmanship described by Tianquanzi. Seeing his reaction, Tang Zheng knew that he had guessed right. He said, "Your sword art is much better than the others. Could it be that you are the successor of the Sword God?" "You guessed right, the Sword Pavilion Master is the Sword God, and this person is one of the three great disciples of the Sword God. The Sword God has a total of 3 mysterious disciples, namely greed, destruction and 7 kills, but I wonder which one is this?" Martial interrupted. The successor of the Sword Pavilion was instantly moved. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Martial, saying, "You are so young but your cultivation is not low. Who are you?" Martial smiled faintly. "The Sword Pavilion is unheard of among ordinary people, but I have heard many rumors about it. Moreover, there are many rumors about your master, the Sword God. Back then he was extremely famous, but in recent years he has restrained himself. I don't know what he is doing." Obviously, martial arts information was more abundant and accurate than the Sword Pavilion. The Sword Pavilion had a super expert like the Sword God, so why was it not included in the 3 great organizations? In fact, there were many reasons for this. The Sword Pavilion was not big, and although it had sword slaves, it was not many. It could not be compared to the 3 great organizations. In addition, the Sword Pavilion was very low-key, and it was very difficult to find its whereabouts in the jianghu. Since you know about the Sword Pavilion, then you should know how powerful it is. Today, 7 kills have killed so many sword slaves. If I don't ask for an explanation, how can I explain it to my master? So you are 7 kills. I have heard a lot about you. In this world, there are not many people who have seen 7 kills' true appearance." Martial laughed. 7 kills coldly snorted and said, "Because most of the people who have seen it are already dead. The Sword Pavilion has always kept a low profile and basically does not care about the affairs of the world. Why did they come to the Changbai Mountain this time? Furthermore, they are looking for some rare treasures. This is truly strange," Martial said doubtfully. 7 kills' expression turned cold as he said, "The Sword Pavilion's actions are not something you can casually guess." However, Tang Zheng was also slightly moved. There must be a demon behind this abnormality. The mysterious Sword Pavilion had entered this mountain to search for rare treasures, which meant that this matter was not simple. As for how the Sword Pavilion found out that there were so many treasures hidden in the mountain, that was even more of a secret. These rare treasures were related to the magic treasure, so Tang Zheng could not let his guard down. Moreover, the other party had already found one, so it was even more necessary to get to the bottom of it. But asking like this would obviously not lead to any results, so Tang Jing did not want to waste his breath. He pointed Battle Soul forward, the sword pointed at 7 kills and said in a cold voice, "Just now was just a warm-up. Now is the main course. I think we can determine the victor now." Tang Jing could not see through the other party's cultivation, so the other party was at least a 7th grade xianxia warrior. However, Tang Jing was not worried because he was confident that he would win. He still had a trump card that he had not used yet. Of course, the trump card was not the 4 symbols venerables. Summoning the 4 symbols venerables would cause too much of a commotion. There were still people from the sword pavilion in the mountain forest. If the commotion was too great, it would attract other people or even the sword god. Even if Tang Jing had the 4 symbols venerables, he still did not have the confidence to win. One had to know that the sword god had once fought with Xianxia, and Xianxia was not stingy with his praise. This was enough to show how high the sword god's cultivation in the sword Dao was. Moreover, if he used the 4 symbols venerables to deal with the sword pavilion's successor, then Tang Jing felt that he was making a mountain out of a molehill. 7 kills had exchanged more than 100 moves with Tang Jing, and had already guessed Tang Jing's strength. Although the latter's cultivation in the sword Dao was high, it was on par with his own. One had to know that his rising sun sword art had already reached perfection. He did not believe that he could deal with Tang Jing's mysterious sword art. Back then, when he had taken the sword god as his teacher, he had taken the initiative to choose this rising sun sword art. This sword art was indeed a perfect fit for him, and his sword arts had improved by leaps and bounds. He was only 30 years old, but this sword art had already reached perfection. Even the sword god had praised him before. "I want to determine the victor and let you know that the sword pavilion's successor is not just for show." 7 kills said resolutely. Swoosh. He raised his hand and swung his sword down. Even though it was broad daylight, the light on the sword was incomparably bright. It carried the might of the rising sun and attacked Tang Jing. Tang Jing's mouth revealed a trace of a cold smile. He made a feint and blocked the sword. With a thought, a powerful yin qi rushed out from the war spirit sword, and a huge monster pounced towards 7 kills. War spirit. The war spirit that had been sealed in the war spirit sword was released by Tang Jing. The war spirit had been silent in the sword for too long, and Tang Jing wanted to let it see the light of day again. The war spirit roared towards the sky, and the yin qi in the forest was crazily absorbed by him. Then, his body became more and more condensed, just like a real person, except that his body was a little bigger. When Sinosaurus saw the war spirit, he was frightened and quickly retreated. He cried out in horror, "What kind of monster is this?" The war spirit was condensed from a ghost, and its face was somewhat sinister. Furthermore, it was too tall, and its body was surrounded by yin qi, emitting traces of black qi. Its appearance was indeed not very good, but it was enough to scare people. 7 kills also trembled as he stared at the huge monster. Just now, he had seen the war spirit fly out from Tang Jing's sword with his own eyes, so the identity of the opponent was obvious. He looked at Tang Jing in horror and asked, "You are a cultivator? We have been fighting for so long and you only reacted now. Isn't your reaction a little too slow?" Tang Jing said jokingly, "A cultivator dares to be so brazen, you are really daring. Today, I will let you know the position of a cultivator in this world. Since you have entered the wrong camp, then you have to tuck your tail between your legs." 7 kills' eyes burst out with a bright light. The rare treasure that he had found this time was related to cultivators, so his master had already warned him to pay attention to the whereabouts of cultivators. Today he had coincidentally met a cultivator, and of course he would not let him go. If he caught him and handed him to his master, it would be a great merit. Suddenly, his heart was restless and he was even more determined to deal with Tang Jing. However, the most important thing now was to deal with this huge monster. The war spirit beat its chest and kept roaring, its voice shaking the surroundings. Then with a tiger's pounce, it directly pounced on 7 kills. 7 kills did not retreat an inch, and the long sword in his hand danced with flowing light, intertwining with each other. It was so tight that the war spirit could not get close to him. Ping ping ping. The war soul's fist smashed into the sword light again and again, causing the sword light to tremble incessantly. Every time the war soul's fist smashed into the sword light's fist would be cut in half. However, the war soul would heal the wound with lightning speed, and its fighting strength was still off the charts. The war spirit was like a tireless machine, punching again and again. Finally, with a crack, the sword light in front of 7 kills was destroyed. The war spirit pounced on him, but 7 kills did not panic and stabbed out with his sword. The long sword pierced through the war spirit's chest and came out from its back. However, the war spirit did not seem to feel any pain, and its expression did not change. It stretched out its big hand and grabbed at 7 kills' head. If it hit, his head would explode into a bloody mess. At the critical moment of life and death, Xianxia finally understood that this colossus was not as simple as he had imagined, so he hurriedly retreated. However, just as he took a step back, he cried out in his heart, because even though Tang Jing was standing in front of him, there seemed to be something waiting for him behind him, causing him to feel uneasy. His senses were very sharp. With a flash of light, a snake-like rope wrapped around his waist and quickly wrapped around his arms. After a while he was tied up by the rope like a big dumpling. There was no doubt that this was the power of the dragon-trapping rope. Tang Jing used the war spirit to attract the opponent's attention, and calculated the opponent's movements and position. Then he used the dragon-trapping rope to wait for the rabbit. Naturally he caught the rabbit. Tang Jing had no choice but to use such a strategy. This way he could capture the opponent with the least commotion. Otherwise, with the opponent's strength, if he wanted to capture him alive, it would definitely cause a huge commotion. Wouldn't that be inviting help? Tang Jing was not that stupid. Chapter 582. Xianxia, now we can have a good talk. Ignoring Xianxia's furious gaze, Tang Jing smirked. Since when did a cultivator of your level appear in this world? Who are you? Xianxia asked, gritting his teeth. You seem to be my captive right now. Of course, I should be the one asking you questions, not you. Otherwise you will be in great pain. As soon as he finished speaking, the dragon-trapping rope flashed and Xianxia's bones cracked. Xianxia's face twisted in pain as he screamed. After a while the screams stopped. Xianxia's veins were bulging and he was sweating profusely. How is it? It doesn't feel good, does it? Tang Jing sneered. No matter what you ask, I will not tell you. Xianxia's eyes were filled with murderous intent as he clenched his teeth and refused to back down. Haha, you have quite a backbone. No wonder you are the sword god's disciple. Tang Jing purposely praised him. Xianxia raised his head proudly when he heard the word backbone. Tang Jing sneered and changed the topic. He pretended to casually add, this time your sword garret's large-scale operation must be led by your master, right? Of course. Xianxia said without hesitation. But as soon as the words left his mouth, he suddenly realized that he had fallen into Tang Jing's trap. He had clearly said that he would not answer any of Tang Jing's questions, but he had inadvertently fallen into Tang Jing's trap. You, despicable! Xianxia roared in anger. Tang Jing did not mind and smiled faintly. He thought that although these disciples of the sword garret were outstanding in the way of the sword, there was clearly something wrong with their heads. It was so easy for him to get information out of them. This information was undoubtedly very important to him. If the sword god was not in Changbai, then he could go all out. But since the sword god had come as well, then he had to be careful. Especially since he'd captured the sword god's outstanding disciple and annihilated those sword servants. 7 kills gritted his teeth in hatred. He rolled his eyes and said fiercely, Master is in the Changbai Mountains. He'll be looking for you soon. When that time comes, I'll see what use your insignificant magic can be. Perhaps my magic is really useless, but the rare treasures that your sword pavilion is looking for are all used by cultivators. What use do you have for them? Tang Jing asked suspiciously. I fell into your trap just now. Do you think I'll still answer your question? 7 kills asked mockingly. Tang Jing didn't think much of it. Looks like you're not stupid. 7 kills snorted coldly and looked death in the eye as he said, If you want to kill me or torture me, do as you please. Don't even think about trying to get information out of me. 7 kills looked resolute and did not show any signs of wavering. Tang Jing's heart skipped a beat. 7 kills was a stubborn person. It would not be easy to get more information out of him. However, Tang Jing was not willing to give up just like that. Sword Pavilion's operation this time was definitely not simple. He had to figure out the whole story. Martial looked at Tang Jing mockingly. Seeing him suffer, she felt an indescribable sense of pleasure. What, are you out of tricks? Tang Jing turned a deaf ear to her words. His eyes flickered. Sinosaurus, however, could not bear to see his brother suffer. He quickly volunteered, Third brother, let me do it. I want to see if his bones are harder than my mountain-shattering meteor hammer. Mountain-shattering meteor hammer. 7 kills' pupils shrank as he stared at the weapon in Sinosaurus's hand. He remembered seeing a pit in the heavenly pit with the help of the light. Its shape was very similar to the mountain-shattering meteor hammer. Your mountain-shattering meteor hammer was found in the heavenly pit, right? 7 kills asked loudly. Xianxia subconsciously pulled the mountain-shattering meteor hammer closer to his chest and asked, "What does that have to do with you?" Hearing this, 7 kills was 100% sure that his guess was correct. He was overjoyed. After searching for so long, he had finally found a rare treasure. "Brat, let me tell you. The mountain-shattering meteor hammer is not an ordinary magic weapon. With your little ability you can only possess it. You will only bring disaster to yourself." Xianxia angrily glared at him and said, "Hey, what nonsense are you talking about? What disaster? I have the Thai meteor hammer. If God blocks me, I will kill God. If Buddha blocks me, I will kill Buddha. Why would I be afraid of a disaster?" "Humph, ignorant." 7 kills disdainfully said, "Do you think the mountain-shattering meteor hammer is so simple?" Xianxia suddenly had an idea and took the opportunity to ask, "Then tell me what is so special about it?" 7 kills was about to speak but suddenly closed his mouth and said, "You want to trick me again? Let me tell you it's not that easy. I won't be fooled." Xianxia angrily roared and was about to swing the mountain-shattering meteor hammer to smash the other into pieces when he was quickly stopped by Tang Zheng. "Third brother, let go of me. This person has become a prisoner but he is still so arrogant. It's too infuriating. If I don't teach him a lesson he won't be honest," Xianxia angrily said. Tang Zheng patted him on the shoulder and said, "Calm down." Then he rolled his eyes and said meaningfully, "Since you value the mountain-shattering meteor hammer so much, then this mountain-shattering meteor hammer must be more powerful than the treasure you found before." "Nonsense, how can the mountain-shattering meteor hammer be mentioned in the same breath as the sword spirit?" 7 kills immediately retorted. "Sword spirit?" Tang Zheng's heart skipped a beat. "What is the sword spirit?" 7 kills widened his eyes and exclaimed, You are trying to trick me again. You are too cunning." "Hehe, if you don't say it then I can only squeeze a little bit of toothpaste." Tang Zheng coldly laughed. 7 kills had already realized that the more he spoke, the more likely he would make a mistake. In terms of words he was no match for Tang Zheng, so it was better not to say anything. He angrily snorted and then did not say a word. He only looked hatefully at Tang Zheng. Tang Zheng was not willing to give up, so he used all his tricks to lure the other to speak. However, the other had already suffered a few losses and had thoroughly learned his lesson. He would not be tricked again. Tang Zheng was at his wit's end as he unwillingly gave a cold snort, thinking that this sword spirit was even more powerful than the mountain-shattering meteor hammer. Moreover, it was clear that the other party knew the origin of the mountain-shattering meteor hammer, so he must find a way to get to the bottom of it. Marshall coldly laughed and said, "Since you can't get anything out of him, then just kill him. Why waste your breath? Kill." Tang Zheng's heart skipped a beat. 7 kills was an enemy, and he had never been merciful to his enemies. However, if he directly killed him, then wouldn't all the clues be cut off? He thought hard and frowned. Looking at 7 kills' provocative eyes, he was not angry. Instead he was abnormally calm. Killing the other party was very simple, but the key was to know the information. Suddenly he had an idea. He pretended to be angry and said, "7 kills, do you want to die so easily? You are thinking too simply. In a moment I will make you beg for death." 7 kills was unmoved. He disdainfully laughed and said, "Whatever you have, just come at me. Then you just wait. I guarantee that you will never forget it." Tang Zheng grabbed 7 kills, sealed his acupoints, removed the dragon-trapping rope and ran down the mountain. The other two did not know what he was thinking, so they could only follow. In front of them was a lake which was completely covered by ice and snow. Just now they had directly passed through the ice. Therefore the 4 of them continued to walk through the layer of ice. When they reached the center of the lake, Tang Zheng stepped down and the layer of ice let out a cracking sound. With a gulu sound, Tang Zheng and Qi Sha disappeared from the surface of the ice. A huge hole appeared in the ice. It seemed that Tang Zheng had used too much force and directly shattered the ice. Tang Zheng exclaimed and subconsciously let go of 7 kills in his hand, and struggled to swim upstream. Whoosh! He finally came out of the water, but his hands were empty. There was no sign of 7 kills. Seeing this, Xianxia was shocked and said, "Where is 7 kills? How did he disappear?" When he entered the water he slipped. I don't know where he landed. However, don't worry. I sealed his acupoints and he can't move in the ice water. He will definitely die, Tang Zheng said confidently and loudly. This voice was like a loudspeaker, spreading to every corner of the lake under the ice. Marshall frowned and looked suspiciously at Tang Zheng, not knowing why he spoke so loudly. Xianxia did not think of this and nodded. That makes sense. If he can't move, he will definitely die in this ice hole. But it's a pity that I didn't get much useful information from him. Let's go, Tang Jing urged. The three of them quickly left the lake. Tang Jing quickly grabbed Sinosaurus. Second brother, stop. What's wrong? Let's watch a good show. Tang Jing smiled mysteriously. Martial finally realized and said, you deliberately broke the ice and let him fall in. This is deliberately giving him a chance to escape. No wonder you said those words so loudly. Tang Jing gave a thumbs up and praised, smart, you even noticed this. Sinosaurus slapped his head and exclaimed in a low voice, third brother, you are really too cunning. No, too smart. This move of casting a long line to catch a big fish is too amazing. Casting a long line to catch a big fish, this was Tang Jing's strategy. Since he couldn't get any useful information, he would change his method. He had purposely only temporarily sealed the other party's acupoints. As long as the other party tried his best to break through the acupoints, he would be able to regain his freedom. When he heard that Tang Jing had left, he would definitely seize this opportunity to escape. Furthermore, he would definitely report this information to the sword god immediately. Following the map, Tang Jing would be able to find the sword god. Although he was afraid of the sword god's strength, the other party was in the light and he was in the dark. As long as he hid well, he wouldn't have to worry about being discovered by the sword god. Then he would have a chance to find out the other party's purpose for coming here, as well as the secrets he was hiding. In addition, Tang Jing was also very interested in the mysterious sword spirit. A treasure that was even more precious than the mountain-shattering meteor hammer could indeed move Tang Jing. One had to know that the mountain-shattering meteor hammer was a heaven-level magic treasure, so the sword spirit was definitely not inferior to it. Chapter 583. Kacha, a layer of ice at the edge of the lake broke, and a wet person climbed onto the shore. He looked around but didn't find anyone suspicious. He shook off the water that had almost frozen into ice on his body and hurriedly circulated his energy. A burst of dense chi rose from his body. In the blink of an eye, the clothes on his body were completely dried by the power. This man was Xianxia, who had survived the disaster. He looked fiercely in the direction where Tang Jing had disappeared and gnashed his teeth. He thought to himself, when I find my master, I'll make you regret it for the rest of your life. Whoosh. He turned into a shadow and shuttled through the forest like a cheetah. However, he didn't notice that the three people were following him like ghosts. Wu turned his head and looked at Tang Jing, as if silently praising his wise decision. The plan of casting a long line to catch a big fish had been carried out smoothly. Xianxia headed north toward the depths of the Changbai mountain. Sinosaurus followed the two closely and whispered, the depths of the mountain are forbidden to us hunters. In the past, there were hunters who went to explore the depths of the mountain, but they often didn't return. Later, it was said that there were ferocious beasts and monsters, so no hunter dared to set foot there again. Tang Jing looked at the trees that were getting taller and taller, and the snow that was already as tall as a person. It was clear that this was not a good place. This place was already considered deserted, but Xianxia still didn't stop. It was as if he was stepping on snow without leaving a trace, only leaving shallow footprints on the white snow. Snow was falling from the sky and soon these footprints were covered by the white snow. Nature was the best at hiding people's tracks. This was also useful for Tang Jing and the other two. They fell far away and their tracks were perfectly covered. Suddenly, a cliff appeared in front of them. In this world of white snow, this cliff was particularly eye-catching. There was a cave on the cliff, but there were already many people with swords standing in front of the cliff. These people were sword slaves of the sword pavilion. They were all expressionless, like puppets, and vigilantly observed their surroundings. 7 kills stopped in front of the cliff, and the sword slaves all bowed to him. Then he glanced up, and with a tap of his foot, he soared into the air along the cliff as if he was climbing a ladder. He arrived in front of the cave and quickly disappeared into the cave. Tang Jing raised his palm. The three of them stopped at the same time and looked at the heavily guarded cliff and cave from afar. They couldn't help but look at each other and see the surprise and doubt in each other's eyes. He was happy that he had finally found the whereabouts of Sword Pavilion, but he was suspicious of why Sword Pavilion had gathered here. We outnumber them. What should we do? Could it be that a group of people would charge forward? Even if the sword god doesn't make a move, I'm afraid we won't be able to bear the consequences. Martial said worriedly. What's there to be afraid of? That 7 kills wasn't third brother's match, and these sword slaves are even less of a match. Sinosaurus was bursting with confidence in Tang Jing, so he spoke indifferently. Martial rolled his eyes. The ignorant were truly fearless. Of course, Tang Jing knew that his second brother was taking things for granted. It was easy to say but not easy to do. You guys stay here. I'll go check it out. Tang Jing muttered to himself and said, You're going alone? Wouldn't that be like a sheep entering a tiger's den? Sinosaurus immediately rejected him, shaking his head like a rattledrum. Martial said without any explanation, I'll go with you. Although she would usually look forward to Tang Jing embarrassing himself, at the critical moment of life and death, she would still stand together with Tang Jing without hesitation. This was a matter of right and wrong. How could it be a child's play? Tang Jing knew what the two of them were thinking and hurriedly comforted them. Listen to me. It's safer for me to go alone because I know illusions. With that, Tang Jing disappeared in front of the two of them. Sinosaurus exclaimed and hurriedly covered his mouth, but his round eyes betrayed the shock in his heart. A strange expression flashed across Wu's face as he remained silent. Well, 3. This illusion technique is too awesome. Leave it to me in the future. If you go and peek at a beauty taking a bath, you won't even be caught. Sinosaurus exclaimed. Martial immediately frowned, killing intent jumping in his eyes. Sinosaurus felt a chill on his neck and immediately shrunk his neck, saying embarrassedly, I'm joking, don't take it seriously. Tang Jing helplessly rolled his eyes at him and continued, The sword god is most likely in the cave, so I used the illusion technique to investigate. And the two of you are not doing nothing. You have to monitor the surroundings. If you encounter any trouble later, you have to help me. Martial was hesitant. The order she received was to protect Tang Jing, but this time she was clearly going against the order. However, Tang Jing's words were reasonable, so she could not refute them. If she wanted to blame someone, she could only blame herself for not knowing how to use illusions. Sinosaurus gladly accepted the decision and immediately hid in the snow at the side. Using the natural camouflage of the snow, he stared at the cliff and the cave without blinking. Tang Jing gave him a thumbs up. Although 3 was not serious at times, but at the critical moment, he did things cleanly and nimbly, not dragging his feet. Wu Zhuozhuo stared at Tang Jing, and when their eyes met, Tang Jing was not willing to be outdone. After a long while, Wu finally lost and muttered, All right, but if there is any danger, immediately escape. We will help you. Tang Jing made an okay gesture and truly used the illusion technique. In that instant, his figure floated, and in the blink of an eye, he completely disappeared in front of everyone as if he was air. He's gone. After Tang Jing said this, the surroundings became completely silent. After a long while, Sinosaurus asked in bewilderment, Did he leave? Martial snappily said, Of course he left. Tang Jing was like a ghost as he silently appeared in front of the cliff, facing the sword servant, but the sword servant still did not notice him. Tang Jing was rather confident in his illusions. If he was unable to hide his tracks in front of these ordinary warriors, then his cultivation would have been wasted. However, he did not dare guarantee that his illusions would be effective in front of the sword god. After all, the sword god's cultivation was too high, and ordinary techniques might not be effective. He did not swagger but carefully walked to the entrance of the cave. As soon as he entered, his eyes lit up. One by one, the sword servants stood at the entrance like sharp swords, each with a sword on their back ready to attack. As long as they found any intruders, they would definitely kill them without mercy. Tang Jing was calm. His emotions did not fluctuate in the slightest as he walked past these sword servants. The cave was not deep, and after walking for a while, it suddenly opened up. The mountain rock above his head disappeared, and was replaced by a huge sky pit. Yes, this cave was actually connected to a sky pit. This sky pit was not deep, so there was plenty of light, no different from daytime. But at this moment, Tang Jing's attention was completely attracted by a scene in the middle of the sky pit. A white skeleton sat in the middle of the sky pit, and above its head floated a ray of light. The light would occasionally pulsate, and when it pulsated, a sharp sword intent would fill the entire sky pit. Tang Jing really wanted to suck in a breath of cold air. This sword intent was too pure, several times purer than the sword intent he and Xianxia had released. It was so strong that it made one's heart palpitate. Moreover, that pulsating light was like a short sword, but it was completely condensed from light and was not a real sword. Seeing this scene, Tang Jing's mind went blank, and then two words quickly jumped into his mind. Sword spirit. Yes, even though no one introduced the origin of this ray of light, Tang Jing was able to determine its true appearance. Tang Jing had long been used to this kind of inexplicable mysterious feeling. This was definitely the effect of Qi Yu's heart. Qi Yu's heart contained thousands of messages, and every time it was triggered, it would appear in his mind. The sword spirit in front of him had obviously met the triggering conditions, and a message followed closely behind. Xianxia had said that the sword spirit was more precious than the mountain-shattering meteor hammer, and Tang Zheng had doubted it. After all, the mountain-shattering meteor hammer was already a heaven-grade magic treasure. But now that he saw the true appearance of the sword spirit, he did not doubt the authenticity of these words at all. This was because the sword spirit could no longer be measured by the grade of a magic treasure. It could not be considered a magic treasure but the soul in the sword. There were many possibilities hidden in the sword spirit, and there was no fixed pattern. As long as it was used properly, it could unleash extraordinary power. This was a supreme existence to the two people who practiced the sword. This sword spirit was left behind after a divine sword was destroyed in the past, but the sword spirit did not dissipate. The sword spirit from ancient times had traveled through billions of years and was left behind until now. Moreover, it was still so powerful, which was enough to prove its original power and value. No wonder even the noble sword god covets the sword spirit so much because its use is too great. I must obtain the sword spirit, and when the sword spirit is injected into the war soul sword, the war soul sword will undergo a qualitative change and be reborn, just like a mortal becoming an immortal, and the war soul sword will also have the sword spirit, which is why it can be called a good sword. Tang Zheng became excited. This temptation was big enough. This time he had actually caught such a big fish, it was worth celebrating. In addition, who was that skeleton? Why was there a sword spirit floating above its head? Could it be that this person was a swordmaster when he was alive? However, this was not a problem that he needed to consider right now. He was not arrogant enough to directly rush up and snatch it. This was because his attention was attracted by another person. This person was thin and not tall. He was an old man with a white face and no beard, but his face could not be considered handsome. It was even a little ugly and his legs seemed to be disabled. One of his feet was high while the other was low. This image was too inferior. If he did not see him in the sky pit, he would definitely think that he was an ordinary old man. However, seeing how respectful and careful 7 Kills was in front of the other party, Tang Zheng immediately realized the other party's true colors. Sword God, the famous sword god actually looks like this. Tang Zheng rolled his eyes, unable to accept this result. In his impression, the sword god was definitely a peerless divine sword. How could he be such an old man? It completely overturned the image of the sword god. Chapter 584. There were 2 people standing in the sinkhole, sword god and Xianxia. 7 Kills stood respectfully in front of the sword god and recounted what had happened to him. The sword god put his hands behind his back and stared at the sword spirit hovering above Whitebone's head. His eyes were burning. When 7 Kills finished speaking, he turned his head and stared at 7 Kills. He asked, "You're saying that the opponent's sword Dao cultivation is very high? His sword art is very mysterious?" "Yes." Xianxia nodded. He knew that his teacher was obsessed with the sword and would not ignore such a mysterious sword art. Even the rising sun sword art could not defeat him? Sword God asked again. Xianxia said with shame, "This disciple is useless. I did not understand the essence of the rising sun sword art." Sword God shook his head. "Wrong? You already understood the essence of the rising sun sword art. It was just that the opponent's sword art was too mysterious, so you lost." Xiaxia's heart skipped a beat. Didn't this mean that the rising sun sword art was not as profound as the opponent's sword art? His master had always been very confident in his swordsmanship, but he actually admitted this on his own accord. This was too inconceivable. Sword God ignored his disciple's shock and said, "According to your description, I seem to have guessed the origin of the opponent's sword art." "What origin?" Sword God's eyes flashed with a look of reminiscence. He said, "A cultivator called Xianxia. This person is his disciple." Xianxia. 7 Kills' pupils couldn't help but widen. There was a period of time last year when it was the darkest for the sword pavilion, because the sword god sword technique actually lost to a mysterious cultivator called Heaven Monk, and he was even injured. To the people of the sword pavilion, this was no different from a sudden clap of thunder. Many people were indignant, thinking that the Heaven Monk must have used some sort of scheme to win against the sword god. But sword god kept it a secret and did not talk about it in detail. No one knew the details. The cultivator that Xianxia met this time was Xianxia's disciple. Enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road. Xiaxia's eyes were filled with killing intent. He gritted his teeth and said, "This disciple is useless. I did not kill this person to avenge my teacher. When did I need you to stand up for me? I've lost face and I'll get it back on my own. Besides, so what if I killed Xianxia's disciple? This is only a method used by the weak. In fact, it doesn't have any substantial meaning. Sword God unexpectedly said. 7 Kills shivered. He understood that this was his master's usual style, but he still couldn't help but feel resentment. After all, his master had been defeated by Xianxia, and even he had been defeated by Xianxia's disciple. Could it be that his master and disciple were so unlucky that they would be forcibly suppressed like this? The sword god didn't care about his disciple's thoughts. Instead, he looked at the sword spirit with eager eyes and said, "As long as I fuse with the sword spirit, I will definitely be able to create a peerless divine sword. At that time, even if I face Xianxia again, I am confident that I will be able to suppress him in the way of the sword." Xia understood and said excitedly, "Then the heavens are truly helping Master. After going through so much danger, we finally obtained the sword spirit. That Xianxia won't be Master's opponent in the future." The sword god laughed crazily. Tang Zheng's illusion technique wasn't seen through. He stood at the edge of the sinkhole, motionless as he listened to the conversation between the master and disciple. When he heard that the other party had seen through his identity, Tang Zheng was slightly moved. This sword god was indeed worthy of his reputation. Just from a few words he was able to recognize the heaven-flying immortal sword technique. "Humph, you've met me and you still want to obtain the sword spirit. How can there be such a good thing?" Tang Zheng sneered as he stared at the sword spirit. If the battle spirit sword absorbs the sword spirit, its quality will definitely improve by leaps and bounds. Yes, this sword spirit must not fall into the hands of the sword god. I have to find a way to get it. The sword god and his disciple didn't know that someone had already lurked beside them. 7 Kills couldn't wait and said, "Master, then you should fuse with the sword spirit now so as to avoid any more trouble." The sword god let out a long sigh and said, "This sword spirit has just broken free from its shackles, and is full of sword intent. It is extremely aggressive, and it is not easy to fuse with it at this moment. Master, there are really so many rare treasures in the 100,000 Mountains. Why don't we just go to the 100,000 Mountains and instead look for this escape?" 7 Kills asked doubtfully. "There is 100 transformation star lord in the 100,000 Mountains. This person is mysterious and unfathomable. If we rashly enter the 100,000 Mountains, it is very likely that we will not be able to return," the sword god explained. 7 Kills' heart trembled. Just who was this 100 transformation star lord? Even his master was so afraid of him. However, this was truly a pity that he couldn't personally go to the 100,000 Mountains. Previously, there was an unforeseen event in the 100,000 Mountains, and the restrictions were completely broken. These rare treasures broke free from their restraints and flew out of the 100,000 Mountains, wandering all over Wuxia. This Changbai Mountain is one of the places, and it took us a long time to confirm this point. That's why we spent so much effort to search for it. As expected, the heavens do not let us down and we found it." The sword god sighed. When Tang Zheng heard this, he was shocked. He knew that the restrictions on the 100,000 Mountains had been removed, but he didn't know that so many rare treasures had flowed out of the 100,000 Mountains. Who knew how many divine weapons from the ancient era were buried in the prehistoric heavenly tomb? Back then, Tang Zheng didn't even have the time to search for treasures, but who would have thought that these treasures would actually run out and benefit the sword god? Since it's a treasure from the 100,000 Mountains, then it's even more impossible for the sword god to take advantage of it. He had contributed greatly to the disappearance of the restrictions on the 100,000 Mountains, so how could he let the enemy take advantage of him? Then why did these rare treasures fall into the sky cavern? Could there be a reason for this? 7 Kills asked like a curious child. The sword god shook his head. "I don't know for now." Tang Zheng's heart skipped a beat. He had almost overlooked this question. Could it be that there really was a mysterious reason behind this? But Chi Yu's heart did not give him an answer this time, so he could only suppress this thought in his heart for the time being. Since the sword god had said that the sword soul was overflowing with sword intent, was extremely aggressive, and was not easy to fuse with, then Tang Zheng did not have to worry about the sword soul falling into the hands of the sword god for the time being. However, another problem was placed in front of him. Since even the sword god was unable to do anything to the sword soul, what could he do? Looking at the rare treasures with his own eyes, but being unable to use them for himself, this kind of pain and torture was not good at all. Just as he was deep in thought, suddenly, a loud sword hum sounded out from above the sky cavern. Sword god and 7 Kills' expressions changed at the same time and said, "Someone is coming." The sword god did not move and ordered 7 Kills, "Go and send them away." "Yes, master." 7 Kills accepted the order and leaped up. He stepped on the inner wall of the sky cavern and climbed up the sky cavern, disappearing without a trace. Tang Jing did not chase after him but stared at the sword god. The sword god walked around the sword soul, and his expression kept changing. Suddenly he pulled out the sword at his waist. This was a wooden sword, plain and dull. It did not have a scabbard, and it was casually inserted at his waist. Ordinary people who saw this wooden sword would think that it was not a threat at all, and could only be used as firewood. However, Tang Jing definitely did not think so. The sword that the sword god wore so solemnly was definitely not simple, even if it was just a wooden sword. He was not wrong. This wooden sword was more famous than most of the famous swords in the world, and it was famous because of its owner. The sword god had used this wooden sword to defeat countless masters and reap countless lives. In the hands of the sword god, even a blade of grass or a tree was a divine weapon to kill people. The name of this sword was nameless because it did not have a name at the beginning. It was just a piece of wood that the sword god found when he was young, and he polished it into a sword again and again. Then, an inconspicuous boy wielded a nameless wooden sword and defeated all obstacles, weathering countless winters and summers to create the illustrious name of the nameless sword. With the nameless sword in hand, the sword god walked around the sword soul even faster. With a sword hum, the nameless sword stabbed at the sword soul. A powerful sword, intense sword from the sword soul. The sword god took a step back, and the sword soul's pulsing light became even brighter. He glanced at the nameless sword in his hand, and then at the undamaged sword soul. He knew that his test had not succeeded. The nameless sword had not fused with the sword soul. Strange, how can I fuse with this sword soul? No matter how difficult it is, what do I have to fear? The sword god coldly shouted. Shwa shwa shwa, he stabbed 3 times in succession. Fast. It was too fast. Tang Jing did not even see his movements clearly. The 3 swords stabbed at the sword soul in one go. The nameless sword pressed against the sword soul. It shook violently and retreated an inch, but the second sword arrived in an instant and rebounded a bit more. When the third sword hit the sword soul, the nameless sword completely negated the rebounding force and accurately pressed against the sword soul. The sword soul's light immediately enveloped the nameless sword, and the world was filled with terrifying sword intent. The sword god's eyes widened and he shouted in pleasant surprise, "Fuse for me." Circulating his energy, the nameless sword's light became even brighter, pulsing continuously. Even the white skeleton was completely enveloped in it, mysterious and eerie. Tang Jing's eyelids twitched, he cursed in his heart. The sword god was forcefully fusing with the sword spirit. If he succeeded, then Tang Jing could only cry. Just as he was about to move, a figure suddenly appeared in the sky above the sinkhole. The figure rapidly fell and crashed into the ground, kicking up a large cloud of dust. Tang Jing immediately suppressed his urge to attack. He looked at the person lying on the ground in shock. It was Qixia. Who was this person? Even Qixia was no match for him. The sword god glanced at Qixia and was indifferent. He continued to circulate his energy, trying to fuse the sword soul into the nameless sword. Whoosh! A person descended from the sky and landed at the bottom of the sinkhole. He shouted, "Sword god, stop." The sword god was indifferent. He asked, "Who are you? How dare you stop the sword pavilion? Do you want to die?" The person snorted and said, "So what if you are from the sword pavilion? Stop now or your sword pavilion sword slaves will be beheaded." Tang Jing and the sword god looked up. The edge of the sinkhole was already filled with people. The sword pavilion's sword slaves were lined up in a circle, kneeling on the ground. Each of them had a sharp weapon on their neck and they could die at any time. Chapter 585. The sword god glanced at the kneeling sword servant and frowned. "You deserve to die for going against the sword pavilion." As soon as he finished speaking, he had no choice but to move away from the sword soul and slash at the incoming person. A nameless wooden sword, a simple sword, descended from the sky. The sky seemed to darken. Before the sword arrived, the person's legs were already pressed into the ground by the immense sword will. The man raised both of his hands. With a flash of light and a loud crack, the man suddenly stopped and half of his body sank into the ground. The weapon in his hands turned out to be a stick. The stick had already been broken in 2, and blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. A wisp of astonishment and pain flashed on his face while his veins bulged, yet he gritted his teeth and persevered. A simple sword strike was already so powerful. No wonder he was the sword god. Tang Jing couldn't help but be speechless. If he were to fight against the sword god with his own strength, it would be like an ant trying to shake a tree, unable to withstand a single blow. To be able to block my sword, you are not a nobody. If you still don't report your name, then you will become a nameless ghost under my sword. Sword god coldly said. Do you not care about the life and death of the sword slave? The sword god coldly snorted and said, They are dead. With me taking revenge, none of you should even think about leaving this place. All of you will be buried with them. That is enough. The person who came was also a ruthless person. He roared, Do it. Poof, poof. Streams of blood sprinkled down from the top of the crater, as if it was raining blood. But Sword God did not even blink. He just slashed again. The newcomer roared with all his might and soared into the sky. The broken rod in his hands met the nameless sword. Bang bang. With two snapping sounds, the rod was shattered into pieces. The tip of the sword slashed towards his forehead. In the next moment he seemed to be about to be split into two. An expression of despair appeared in his eyes. He'd underestimated the sword god's strength and determination. Not only was this person a sword maniac, he was also a cold-blooded person. So many sword slaves were unable to make him hold back. The sword god was indeed a cold-blooded person. For the sake of pursuing an even more formidable sword Tao, for the sake of a higher cultivation, how could a mere sword servant make him stop? In his heart, the importance of a sword soul far surpassed the life of a sword servant. The man was filled with regret. He had been too reckless. He had rushed to the northeast as soon as he had received the news. Just as he had found out something, he had lost his life here. However, he was not afraid. Instead, he showed a resolute expression because he was a warrior of the country. Bang! With a loud sound, the war soul sword stopped in midair. The air violently fluctuated, and a long sword as black as ink was exposed in the air. However, this sword was suspended in midair without any support, as if it was controlled by an invisible hand. Everyone looked at this scene in astonishment. Even the sword god stopped in his tracks and looked suspiciously at the black sword that had blocked his attack. Xianxia. He suddenly frowned. Powerful. He actually followed 7 kills here. With just one look, he could tell that this sword belonged to the person who fought 7 kills, so he immediately figured out the whole story. 7 kills was lying on the ground, heavily injured, unable to move. He stared at Black Sword, his eyes almost popping out of their sockets. It turned out that he had fallen for Black Sword's trap and had led the wolf into the house. At the same time he was filled with fear. He had been very careful along the way, but he had still been followed. Since you're here, why don't you show yourself? Why are you sneaking around? The sword god asked coldly. His voice echoed in the sinkhole like a sharp blade, stirring up every inch of space. Every word drilled into Tang Zheng's ears as if it was going to explode his head. He endured the pain and did not show himself as the sword god wanted. This time he had no choice but to lend a helping hand because the person who came was someone he knew, Su Yingtian. Su Yingtian was his ally, so he could not just watch as Su Yingtian died under the sword god's sword. However, if he helped, it would be equivalent to exposing his whereabouts. If he wanted to catch him off guard, it would be even more difficult. Especially when he received the sword god's sword, he felt that his arm was about to break. The power of the sword god's sword was too great. Humph, you want to hide in front of me? Let's see if you have the ability. The sword god did not hear a response and bellowed in anger. With a slash of the nameless sword, the sky pit was filled with sword images, leaving no place to hide. Tang Zheng had no choice but to recall the war soul sword. With a sound of ding-dang, beautiful sparks flew in all directions, and Tang Zheng's figure was forced to be exposed. Whiz! The sword god's figure flashed, and the nameless sword slashed towards Tang Zheng's direction. Tang Zheng gritted his teeth and used his sword to block, and with a crisp sound Tang Zheng explosively retreated, his hands went numb, and the war soul sword actually fell to the ground. At the same time, his illusion technique had completely lost its effect, revealing his figure. You finally appeared. The sword god glared at Tang Zheng like a tiger eyeing its prey. In front of him, there had never been a junior who dared to be so unbridled and not put him in his eyes. Su Yingtian was suddenly startled as he looked at Tang Zheng in disbelief. No matter what, he did not expect Tang Zheng to be here and even save him from the gates of hell. This peck and drink was truly a fortuitous encounter. If he did not maintain a good relationship with Tang Zheng, then Tang Zheng would not have helped him no matter what. He could not help but rejoice that he made the decision to ally with Tang Zheng to deal with the Dragon Group. Not only was this beneficial to the National Security Bureau, it was also very important to him. You are Tian Chanzi's disciple. I want to see just how much you have learned from him. The sword god walked step by step towards Tang Zheng with killing intent between his brows. Tang Zheng waved his hand and the war soul sword flew back into his hand. He held the sword horizontally in front of his chest and faced the sword god. He coldly said, Since the sword god is interested in sparring with me, then of course I will not disappoint you. The ignorant are fearless. You are not your master, yet you dare to be so arrogant and condescending. The sword god disdainfully said. After he finished speaking, the nameless sword turned into a ray of light and slashed towards Tang Jing. Tang Jing readied himself for action as the flying immortals from heaven beyond heaven sword technique was displayed in a fluid motion. Only the sound of ding ding dang dang could be heard as Tang Jing quickly retreated before fiercely crashing into the mountain wall, spitting out a large mouthful of blood. Tang Jing wiped away the blood and looked at the calm and composed sword god who did not even take a breath. He deeply felt the gap between them. To be able to receive the sword god's sword was already the limit. To think more would be an extravagant hope. However, from these sword techniques he also benefited a lot. The sword god's sword was filled with an unparalleled sword intent. It was truly a rare sword technique. Moreover, this sword technique was definitely not the rising sun, but another set of sword techniques that were even more profound. The sword god's sword techniques were outstanding, and he had more than one set of profound sword techniques. These sword techniques were all created by him, and he could truly be called a grandmaster of the way of the sword. Tang Jing was unable to probe his opponent's cultivation, but without a doubt he was an expert in the grandmaster realm. To defeat him was as difficult as ascending to the heavens, and he did not dare to have such extravagant hopes. Thus, the most important thing was to obtain the sword spirit and then escape. When Su Yingtian saw that Tang Jing was able to block several of his opponent's moves, he could not help but be secretly speechless. He had still underestimated Tang Jing's strength. He was barely able to block the two sword strikes, but Tang Jing was able to block all of them. The difference in strength between the two was obvious. Of course, he was more concerned about whether or not he could leave safely. The members of the National Security Bureau at the edge of the sinkhole saw that their director was in great danger, and some of them could not help but come down to help him. Seeing this, Su Yingtian quickly stopped this stupid action through the headset. He could not have the attitude of the sword god who treated human lives like grass. He had to be responsible for his own members. However, Su Yingtian's heart was also in turmoil. After all, the opponent was the sword god. It was still unknown whether Tang Jing could escape with him. Tang Jing had his back against the mountain wall. He had no way to retreat. A sickly flush appeared on his face as he stared at the sword god who was walking step by step. Looking past the sword god's shoulder, Tang Jing locked onto the sword spirit. Suddenly he thought of a plan and clenched his teeth. This time I will gamble. Whether I live or die will depend on my luck. A sword flew over, but Tang Jing did not use his sword to block it. Instead, he waved his hands forward, and an aura of black clouds blotted out the sky and enveloped the sinkhole. The sword god's nameless sword attack came to an abrupt halt as it was blocked by a giant. The four symbols venerable raised a leg and stomped down. Boom. The sword god disappeared. The place he stood had already collapsed and there was no trace of him anywhere else. It was as though he had been stepped on by the four symbols venerable. 7 Kills was stunned for a moment before he flew into a rage. I'll kill you and avenge master. Su Yingtian's heart skipped a beat as he watched this scene in disbelief. Could the sword god have been stomped into minced meat so easily? Tang Jing did not care about the sword god's life or death. He had to seize this rare opportunity to fuse with the sword spirit. With a flash, he arrived in front of the sword spirit. The battle soul sword stabbed at the sword spirit as a biting cold sword intent spread out in all directions. The sword spirit's light enveloped the battle soul sword and then enveloped the white bones below. The white bones emitted waves of white light. Tang Jing was overjoyed. He could already feel a strong sword intent seeping into the battle soul sword. This seemed to be a fusion, and it was not as simple as he had imagined. Faster, faster. Tang Jing's face revealed joy as he silently urged. Suddenly, the joy on Tang Jing's face came to an abrupt halt. The sword spirit's light violently pulsed, extremely unstable, and with an explosive sound, Tang Jing fiercely smashed into the mountain wall. Only then was he able to dissolve the power. The sword spirit returned to its original state, but there was an obvious change. A wisp of clear chi slowly rose from the white bones and floated above the sword spirit. The clear chi gathered and finally formed a person's face. This person swept his gaze over them and stared at them with an unfriendly gaze. He said coldly, "You want to steal my sword spirit? How can I let you do as you wish? Who are you?" Tang Jing was overwhelmed with shock as he looked at the other party in disbelief. "Sword spirit master." The other party said arrogantly. "It was just a remnant soul." Tang Jing curled his lips. His fiery eyes of truth immediately saw through the true identity of this wisp of clear chi. Chapter 586. The remnant soul had a dignified appearance. Even though it was just a remnant soul, it still had an imposing aura. He must have been an extraordinary person when he was alive. However, why would such a great figure be buried in the sinkhole and even leave his sword soul in the prehistoric heavenly tomb thousands of miles away? There were too many unknown secrets hidden within. Even if Tang Tangjing racked his brains, he would not be able to figure it out. The person who stole my sword soul shall suffer the pain of 10,000 arrows piercing his heart. The remnant soul said sinisterly. Tang Jing shivered inwardly. This sword soul was not a joke. The remnant soul's remaining power was not small either. If he were to control the sword soul, then Tang Jing would not have a good time. Before he could think of a countermeasure, he heard a loud rumbling sound. The four symbols venerable staggered backwards and kicked his feet into the air. A figure jumped out from under his feet. Everyone looked at the figure that jumped out and could not help but cry out in alarm. This was because this person was the sword god who was previously thought to be stomped into meat paste. He actually did not die from the four symbols venerable's kick. He only appeared to be in a sorry state. The nameless sword in his hand stood proudly as if it was going to pierce through the heavens. The four symbols venerable fell backwards and crashed into the mountain wall with a loud rumbling sound. Mountain rocks fell with a crash as if it was raining rocks. The members of the National Security Bureau at the edge of the sinkhole could not stand steadily and almost fell into the sinkhole. The sword god raised his head and looked at the four symbols venerable in an unruly manner. He said coldly, "You have more tricks up your sleeve than your master. But since you have a peerless sword art in your hand instead of focusing on practicing the sword, you are wasting your time on these tricks. Today I will let you know that small tricks are small tricks in the end. How can they be compared to the brilliant way of the sword?" The sword god held his wooden sword and walked straight towards the four symbols venerable. In this narrow space, the four symbols venerable occupied most of the space. It was a huge monster, and the sword god was an insignificant little dot in front of it. However, as the sword god walked over step by step, his aura underwent a tremendous change. In the end, he was like a giant whose aura did not lose to the four symbols venerable in the slightest. When Tang Jing saw this scene, he was shocked. The sword god was indeed worthy of his reputation. He was fine even with this, but he was miserable. In front of him was the remnant soul, and behind him was the sword god. Either one of them was enough to make him suffer. The sword god glanced at Tang Jing and the sword spirit and said disdainfully, "With your little ability, you want to meddle with the sword spirit? You are truly delusional. I'm not in a hurry to deal with you. I'll let you try to subdue the sword spirit first. I'll let you understand what an insurmountable gap is. There are many things in this world that can't be done by relying on brute force and self-righteousness." He would have to spend a lot of effort to fuse with the sword spirit, which was why he had the confidence to say such words. He believed that Tang Jing simply did not have the strength to fuse with the sword spirit. This was the confidence of a sword Dao grandmaster who had devoted his entire life to sword Dao. He was more concerned about the four symbols venerable one, as this was the greatest threat to him. That was why he drew his sword and attacked, preparing to use the nameless wooden sword in his hand to overturn this big guy. Whoosh! The sword god was like a shooting star as he streaked across the sky and pierced the four symbols venerable one's chest. As expected of the sword god, he truly had sharp eyes. In just one exchange, he had actually seen through the four symbols venerable one's weakest point. The four symbols venerable one's chest was its life gate, so with one strike, a white dot appeared on its chest. That was the mark left behind by the nameless sword. The four symbols venerable one had originally wanted to take a step forward, but was suddenly pushed back by this strike. It was tightly pressed against the mountain wall, unable to move. Tang Jing's gaze turned cold. He temporarily gave up on the sword spirit and focused all his attention on controlling the four symbols venerable one. Seeing the sword god attack again, the four symbols venerable one hurriedly threw out a few punches. Ding Dang did not stop as she blocked the nameless sword. Fortunately, the four symbols venerable one was impregnable. The sword god would not be able to harm its foundation for a while. However, Tang Jing did not have absolute confidence that the four symbols venerable one could withstand the sword god's repeated attacks. If something were to happen to the four symbols venerable one, he would really regret it to death. The losses would outweigh the gains. The sword god curled his lips in disdain. "Your skin is thick. Looks like it'll take some effort." Before he had even finished speaking, the sword god launched another fierce attack. In such a narrow space, the four symbols venerable one's movements were inconvenient. Meanwhile, the sword god was like a specter, leaping up and down. The four symbols venerable one could only block a portion of the attacks. Most of the time, it was on the receiving end of the attacks. Tang Jing clenched his teeth. However, he could not help but sigh inwardly as he accepted reality. If they were on flat ground, the four symbols Venerable One would not be so passive. However, things did not go as he wished. If he did not hurry up and leave, then he would have to think of a way to fuse with the sword spirit. Otherwise, this trip would have been a waste. Even if he could not fuse with the sword spirit, he could not let the sword god benefit so easily. His gaze once again locked onto the sword spirit and the remnant soul. The remnant soul laughed mockingly. I've let you live long enough. Obediently accept your death. As soon as it finished speaking, the radiance of the sword spirit pulsed and flickered violently. Every time it flickered, dozens of sword intents would spread out. Before long, this small space was filled with thousands of sword intents. It really felt like thousands of arrows were piercing through one's heart. Tang Zheng's expression changed abruptly. This remnant soul was more powerful than he had expected. He hurriedly used his sword to block. However, the thousands of swords had already arrived before him. With a series of bangs, they broke through his defense and reached his body. Tang Zheng's blood flowed rapidly as if it was about to boil. His heart beat violently as if it was about to burst out of his throat. Suddenly, a stream of blood flowed out from his heart. It rapidly flowed to his brain and filled his eyes. In the next second, his eyes became scarlet red like two scorching suns. Sword servant, how dare you? Tang Jing shouted angrily. However, his voice seemed to have changed a lot. It was not Tang Zheng's original voice at all. The thousands of sword intents stopped in front of Tang Zheng. The remnant soul was suddenly startled and revealed a panicked expression. It looked at Tang Zheng in disbelief and asked with trepidation, "You, who are you?" Su Yingtian had been paying attention to Tang Zheng. When he saw this scene, his expression became strange. Qi Sha looked as if he had seen a ghost. He was a swordsman and naturally understood how terrifying the thousands of arrows piercing through one's heart were. He originally thought that Tang Zheng was definitely going to die. Unexpectedly, there was a glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel. This strange change had occurred and he was overwhelmed. Tang Zheng looked at the remnant soul and said arrogantly, "Who do you think I am?" "Master." The remnant soul hesitated for a moment and finally cried out as if it had awakened from a dream. It quickly knelt down in front of Tang Zheng and prostrated itself on the ground. "Master, the sword servant finally sees you again." The sword servant thought that he would never see you again. "The heavens really have eyes. Master, you are still alive." The remnant soul was extremely excited and cried bitterly as it spoke. "Humph," crying and wailing. "Where is your decency?" Tang Jing reprimanded without any trace of politeness. "Yes, master's reprimand is very good. The sword servant does not dare to do it again. However, the sword servant's body has long since disappeared and only this remnant soul is left. I am unable to serve master." The remnant soul said regretfully. Tang Jing shook his head and said, "Who says I can't? I want to fuse with your sword spirit. From now on, you and the sword spirit will become one." The remnant soul was startled and immediately became overjoyed. "Thank you, master, for giving the sword servant another chance." Seeing this scene, Qi Sha's courage was already splitting. He realized that something was wrong and impatiently shouted, "Master, this brat is about to fuse with the sword spirit. Hurry up and stop him." When Su Yingtian heard this, he was unable to help at all. His skills were unable to withstand a single blow from the sword god. Moreover, he was heavily injured just now. However, he was also unable to understand the changes in Tang Zheng. However, one thing was certain, this brat was far more mysterious than he had imagined. He would always inadvertently give people a huge surprise. The sword god had already left dozens of white spots on the four symbols Venerable's body, especially on his chest. If this continued, the door on the four symbols Venerable's chest would really be broken. When he heard his disciples' cry of alarm, the sword god hurriedly glanced over and his expression immediately changed. He realized that something was wrong. He abandoned the four symbols Venerable and dove down, rushing towards Tang Zheng like a cannonball. Tang Zheng did not even look, but extended his war soul sword and pierced it into the center of the sword soul. Immediately, the sword soul erupted with a brilliant light, and the remnant soul also entered the sword soul. The light wrapped around the war soul sword, and in the end even Tang Zheng was bathed in it, emitting a mysterious aura. The light disappeared, the sword soul and the remnant soul also disappeared, leaving only the war soul sword quietly floating in the air. The war soul sword didn't seem to have changed at all. It was still as black as ink and unremarkable as before. The sword god had already arrived behind Tang Zheng, but Tang Zheng did not turn around at all. He only grabbed the war soul sword and gently slashed backwards. Heaven flying immortal sword technique. However, it was not the first 4 moves but the 5th move, return to origin. This move was truly ordinary, like a baby raising a toy sword and waving it weakly. Tang Jing had already practiced the first 4 moves for some time, but he never thought that he would be able to master the 5th move today and use it. There was no world-shaking aura, making people wonder if this was really the mystical sword technique of the heaven-flying immortal sword. Even the sword god suspected that the other party's sword was purely teasing him and could not hurt him at all. Therefore he was not afraid at all. With a mighty aura he slashed out with the nameless sword. Clang. There were no fancy movements, but time and space seemed to have stopped for a moment. Then the sword god roared, his beard and hair fluttered like a crazy beast. He took a step forward and stabbed the nameless sword into Tang Jing's chest. However, a terrifying power came from the tip of the sword, causing him to be unable to move forward at all. Instead, he was like a meteor streaking across the sky, smashing into the mountain wall with a boom. The corner of Tang Jing's mouth curled up into an unfathomable smile. His finger gently stroked the 3-foot-long peak of the war soul sword, and said, "Only with a unique sword soul can it become a divine sword. From now on, the war soul sword has the possibility of becoming a divine sword." There was a look of satisfaction between his brows. When Suing Tian and Qixia saw this, their eyeballs almost popped out, and their mouths could be stuffed with a rock. What the F***ck was going on? Tang Jing actually defeated the famous and aloof sword god in 1 move? This was too ridiculous. Chapter 587. Tang Jing stood proudly, holding his sword with one hand. The scarlet-red color in his eyes gradually disappeared, returning to his normal state. With a sudden quiver, he regained consciousness and looked at the large crater in the mountain wall in shock. The crater created by the sword god. What's going on? Tang Jing was dumbstruck. He completely did not remember what had happened before. Why did all of this turn out like this? You're too amazing. Suing Tian gave him a heartfelt thumbs up. Tang Jing blushed with shame. How am I amazing? This has nothing to do with me, okay? Before his doubts were resolved, his attention was quickly attracted by another matter. His eyes burned as he stared at the war soul sword in his hand. And when did the war soul sword become a heaven-level magic treasure? Sword spirit. Suddenly he discovered that there was one more thing in the war soul sword. It was as if the war soul sword had a soul and its own consciousness. Master. A voice sounded in his mind. He was shocked and asked, "Who are you? Why are you in my mind?" Back then Tian Chanzi lived in his mind, once bitten by a snake, 10 years afraid of a well rope, thinking that someone else had lived in his mind. "Master, I am the sword spirit of the war soul sword." "Sword spirit, you are the sword spirit from before?" "Not entirely. I have fused with that sword spirit, the sword attendant and the original war soul sword. I am a brand new sword spirit, master sword spirit." The other party respectfully explained. Tang Jing only understood half of it. After thinking for a while, he guessed that the sword attendant was probably the remnant soul. But why did all of this happen? Didn't the remnant soul use the 10,000 arrows piercing heart technique to end his life? Tang Jing quickly threw this question to the sword spirit, but heard the sword spirit say, "Master, my previous memories have been completely erased. My memories will start from now on." Tang Jing sighed helplessly. No one could give him an answer. Bang! A loud noise interrupted Tang Jing's thoughts. The sword god rushed out of the pile of stones in a panic. His body was covered with dust, and there was still blood at the corner of his mouth. He was looking at the nameless wooden sword in his hand in panic. He stroked the sword with resentment and said, "How could this be? How could this be?" A crack appeared on the nameless sword. It was very small, but it was very obvious. Qixia looked at the crack in horror. Ever since he could remember, he understood that although the nameless wooden sword was not an invincible peerless divine weapon, in the hands of his master, it was absolutely no less than a peerless divine weapon and would never be damaged. That seemingly simple strike had actually cracked the nameless sword. This was enough to turn his worldview upside down. The sword god's emotions were not much calmer than 7 kills. His accessory had been with him his whole life, but now a crack had appeared on it. He suddenly raised his head and stared at Tang Jing with mixed feelings. His eyes kept changing. He said, "How did you do it?" Although Tang Jing did not remember what had happened, with his intelligence, he immediately guessed a thing or two. Of course, he would not be stupid enough to expose himself. Instead, he pretended to smile mysteriously and did not speak. This smile made the sword god's heart uneasy. He had seen Tian Chanzi's power. As the saying goes, the pupil surpasses the master. The disciple might be stronger than the master. As for the issue of age, the sword god had never believed that age could determine the level of cultivation. He would not be surprised at all if a 3-year-old child was stronger than an old man. Therefore, after thinking about it, the sword god did not suspect anything else. He thought that Tang Zheng had deliberately concealed his strength and had no choice but to explode in the end. However, the strength revealed by this explosion moved him and he did not dare to underestimate it. Although the sword god was unwilling, the sword spirit had already merged into the war soul sword. Even if he coveted it, there was nothing he could do. Facing the sword god who was eyeing him covetously, Tang Zheng's mood did not fluctuate at all, nor was he afraid. At most he would continue to fight. He had experienced too many dangerous situations and had long been trained to remain calm even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him. This kind of reaction made the sword god hesitate. The sword god weighed the pros and cons and finally gritted his teeth. "I will remember your face. Next time I will ask for your advice." After that, he grabbed 7 Kill's collar and jumped to the edge of the crater. The members of the National Security Bureau wanted to surround him to keep him, but he did not even look at them and walked forward. Seeing this, Su Yingtian quickly ordered his subordinates to retreat. After all, the other party was the sword god. Although he was inexplicably scared away by Tang Zheng, if others wanted to stop him, they would be courting death. The figures of the sword god and his disciple had disappeared, but the crater was still terrifyingly quiet. Su Yingtian looked at Tang Zheng and did not know how to organize his words for a long time. Tang Zheng was the first to break the silence. "Director Su, why are you looking at me like that? There are no flowers growing on my face." Su Yingtian smacked his lips and said with lingering fear, "All of this is more unbelievable than flowers growing on your face." After a slight hesitation, he asked, "How did you do all of this?" "I still don't know." Tang Zheng spread out his hands and said helplessly, "Don't play dumb. Everyone isn't blind and they saw it clearly. You forced the sword god to retreat with a single strike, and you even put him in an extremely sorry state. There are very few people in this world who can do this." Tang Zheng smiled bitterly. "You have known me for a long time. If I were really so powerful, would I let you mediate the matter of the dragon group? I would have killed Xing Feng in the dragon group long ago." Su Yingtian looked at Tang Zheng doubtfully and admitted that what he said was true. Moreover, according to his investigation of Tang Zheng, although his overall strength was very strong and even the Chu clan master fell in his hands, that was with the help of the 4 symbols venerables. But just now, Tang Zheng only relied on the sword in his hand to force the sword god to retreat. Moreover, the sword god's strength was far above the Chu clan master's. If he did not see it with his own eyes, he would definitely think that it was a fantasy. "But how do you explain what happened just now?" Su Yingtian broke the clay pot and asked. "You ask me, who should I ask?" Tang Zheng smiled bitterly. "Just now, you seem to have changed into a different person. Even your eyes became scarlet red like the scorching sun. Did this happen to you before?" Su Yingtian asked with a frown. "No. However, you also said that I seem to have changed into a different person. Maybe it was the effect of the sword spirit and that wisp of remnant soul. What if it was him possessing my body?" Tang Zheng made up a story. "That's not right. That remnant soul clearly called you master and even said that he was some sword attendant. Don't try to fool me." Su Yingtian was very smart. How could he be so easily fooled? Tang Zheng spread out his hands and said, "In any case, I don't know. I don't have the answer you want." Su Yingtian looked at him without blinking. He wanted to distinguish the truth of his words, but in the end, based on his experience, Tang Zheng was not lying. He really did not know what had happened just now. Tang Zheng did not know, but he had already guessed a thing or two. Since that remnant soul called him master and he lost consciousness, there was only one explanation. That was, in that instant he was controlled by a mysterious force. Moreover, this mysterious force was activated in his body. After thinking about it carefully, it was not difficult to think of the mysterious Qi Yu's heart in his chest. Not only did it recognize the sword spirit at a glance, it also had many mysterious performances in the past. It was simply full of misdeeds. Could it be that the master of the sword attendant is Qi Yu, and Qi Yu's heart controlled my consciousness at the critical moment, causing me to transform into Qi Yu, which is why the sword spirit and war soul sword fused together? Looking at the dark war soul sword and feeling the surging sword intent contained within, Tang Zheng could not hide his excitement. Heaven-level magic treasure. He finally had a heaven-level magic treasure, and it was an offensive magic treasure. In the future, his fighting strength would greatly increase. Qi Yu's heart saved my life and even gave me such a big gift, but why do I still feel nervous? If Qi Yu's heart were to control me again, wouldn't I become a puppet? Tang Zheng's head tightened. Although Chi Yu's heart had many benefits, this disadvantage caused his heart to turn cold. Chi Yu's heart, what exactly do you want? Tang Jing asked. There was no answer, leaving him helpless. Seeing that he was worried, Su Yingtian asked curiously, what are you thinking about? Tang Jing came back to his senses and was not prepared to tell the other party about this matter. Chi Yu's heart was his secret, and even if there was danger, he would not easily tell others. Nothing. Tang Jing pretended to be calm as he replied, and changed the topic without leaving a trace. Why did your National Security Bureau come here? We received information. Before Su Yingtian could finish rushing, two people rushed into the sky cavern from the cave and shouted, Tang Jing, what happened to you? Wu and Sinosaurus were extremely anxious. When they saw Tang Jing, the two of them rushed in at the same time. Sinosaurus hugged Tang Jing and fiercely patted his back, saying, "3, you really scared me to death. Just now we heard such a big commotion here, we were all worried to death about you." Wu, on the other hand, instantly regained his calm. He was calm and collected as if nothing had happened. It was completely different from his anxious appearance just now. Didn't I tell you to wait? Why did you come here? We're worried about you, especially this great beauty. She's even more worried, and she heard such a big commotion. If we only hide in the distance, what kind of brothers are we? Brothers have to share hardships. Sinosaurus said straightforwardly. Tang Jing glanced at Wu. Under his calm appearance, there was an anxious and urgent thought, which was seen through by Tang Jing. He couldn't help but feel a warmth in his heart. This woman had a sharp tongue but a soft heart. She usually liked to sing against him, and because of many complicated reasons, she didn't even have a good expression towards Tang Jing. He didn't expect her to be so worried about him. This worry came from the bottom of his heart, and Tang Jing could see it with a single glance. If you don't die, then consider yourself lucky. You escaped from the hands of the sword god. Wu said snappily. Chapter 588. Su Yingtian recognized Martial, but Sinosaurus was an unfamiliar face, causing him to be unable to figure out the other party's background. Why did you suddenly come to Changbai Mountain? Su Yingtian asked suspiciously. My classmate is sick, so I came to take a look. I also came to enjoy the scenery of Changbai Mountain. Tang Jing answered first. He did not wish for the matter of the mountain-shattering meteor hammer to be made public. Su Yingtian glanced at Sinosaurus and said, I remember that you have already started school, yet you still have the mood to travel. You are truly in a good mood. After experiencing so many things, shouldn't you let yourself relax? On the other hand, didn't you just say that you came here because of the information? What exactly is the information? Island Nation has people coming to the northeast and seems to be on the move. I came to investigate their purpose, but I didn't expect to find traces of Sword Pavilion. Could it be that Island Nation and Sword Pavilion are both here for the Sword Spirit? Su Yingtian explained. Island Nation? Tang Jing's eyelids twitched. He had already clashed with Island Nation several times. This country was not easy to deal with. They had always been scheming and would definitely not shoot without aim. Since the other party had come to the northeast, then they must have some sort of plan. As for whether or not they came for the Sword Spirit, he was not sure. Have you found the Island Nation? Tang Jing asked. Su Yingtian shook his head regretfully. During the invasion war a few decades ago, Island Nation occupied the northeast region and conducted a detailed exploration of this region. They are extremely familiar with the terrain, so it is extremely difficult to find them hiding in this region. Tang Jing's heart darkened. The war that year was the shame of wuxia. Every wuxia person would never forget it. Since you haven't found it, what are you going to do next? Tang Jing asked. If he could help, then he would naturally spare no effort. I've already sent people to investigate. Where's the sword god? Martial did not care about the schemes of the Island Nation. He looked around at the tragic scene and asked curiously. He was scared away by Tang Jing, Su Yingtian said. Martial's eyes widened in disbelief. Scared away by him? How is that possible? You don't even have a draft if you want to lie. Su Yingtian shrugged and didn't continue to explain. Tang Jing naturally wouldn't do anything unnecessary. He cupped his hands towards Su Yingtian and said, Then we'll go first. We'll contact you when we return to Beijing. You have offended Sword Pavilion this time. You have to be more careful in the future, said Su Yingtian. Tang Jing smiled bitterly and said, I'm not afraid of the itch anymore, and I don't care about the Sword Pavilion. You sure are magnanimous. Su Yingtian shook his head. If it was anyone else, they would have been scared out of their wits. Only Tang Jing was so magnanimous. Tang Jing put the 4 symbols venerables into his sumeru pouch, and the 3 of them left the sky cavern together. When they couldn't see the people from the National Security Bureau, Sinosaurus poked Tang Jing's waist and asked curiously, "Who are they?" "The National Security Bureau." "Wow!" Sinosaurus cried out in surprise, his mouth wide open. "The legendary National Security Bureau. They're in charge of national security. They're not ordinary people. You actually have connections with them. Too awesome." Tang Jing smiled faintly and said, "They're also ordinary people. They're not that extraordinary." Do Long clicked his tongue in admiration. "Oh, your realm is not ordinary. If others knew, they would be scared to death." "Don't tell anyone about what happened today," Tang Jing warned. Sinosaurus patted his chest and promised, "Don't worry, I won't say it even if you beat me to death." "What happened in the sky cavern earlier?" Martial asked. "Didn't Suing Tian tell you?" "Humph, if you don't want to say it, then don't say it. Why are you lying to me?" Martial said snappily. Tang Jing felt wronged and rolled his eyes, not knowing what to say. "Where is the sword pavilion?" Tang Jing changed the topic and asked. Martial shook his head. "Although the martial sect's strength is extraordinary, we still don't know where the sword pavilion is. The sword pavilion is no less mysterious than the martial sect. Do you understand?" Suddenly, she rolled her eyes and asked, "Are you asking this question because you want to kill your way to the sword pavilion?" Tang Jing rubbed his nose and said with a mysterious smile, "I really do have such a plan." "Boasting shamelessly, you're simply courting death." Martial rolled his eyes and impolitely evaluated. Tang Jing did not explain further. He was not lying, but he was not stupid enough to kill his way to the sword pavilion. Instead, he was prepared to call Tianquanzi to meet the sword god. In the sword pavilion, the sword god was the most respected. He had 3 direct disciples under him, which was the most terrifying power. As for the sword slaves, although their swordsmanship was not bad, they were not a threat to Tang Jing. But since he had already formed an enmity with the other party, then Tang Jing would naturally consider completely eliminating this hidden danger. As night fell, the 3 of them walked out of the vast mountains and saw the village from afar. Smoke curled up from the chimneys and the families were already preparing dinner. "And my house hasn't started yet? There's no smoke coming out of the chimney." Sinosaurus raised his head and muttered in bewilderment. "Maybe they've already prepared dinner and are waiting for us." Tang Jing laughed. When he stepped through the courtyard door, the smile on his face suddenly froze and he stopped in his tracks. "What's wrong?" Martial asked with a frown. Tang Jing's face became extremely serious and said in a deep voice, "Something's wrong." "3, don't be so suspicious. We're already home, what could be wrong?" Sinosaurus disagreed and walked into the courtyard with large strides. "Second brother, be careful." Tang Jing wanted to pull him back, but it was already too late. So. Out of nowhere, enemies dressed in black appeared. They were tightly wrapped, leaving only a pair of eyes exposed. Not only did these black-clothed men block their path, they also blocked their path of retreat outside the courtyard. They attacked from the front and back, eyeing them covetously. "Who are you? Why are you in my house?" Sinosaurus asked in anger. Tang Jing and Martial quickly joined up with Sinosaurus. The 3 of them faced the black-clothed men and did not back down. However, Tang Jing also muttered in his heart, "How could there be such ruthless people in this unknown village?" Without a doubt, these black-clothed men were not good people. Every one of them had a faint smell of blood on them. It was obvious that they had seen blood before. Just now, Tang Jing had sensed the faintly discernible smell of blood, which was why he was alert. When the black-clothed man heard Sinosaurus's question, he did not answer and instead asked, "Which one of you is Sinosaurus?" They were actually here for Sinosaurus, which was truly unexpected. "I am Sinosaurus. Who are you people?" Sinosaurus took a step forward and asked. "It's good that it's you. Obediently hand over the thing you obtained. Otherwise, you won't be able to keep your little life." The black-clothed man said with a murderous aura. "What thing?" Sinosaurus was confused. "The thing you obtained in the Changbai mountain." The black-clothed man said with certainty. When the 3 of them heard this, their hearts were greatly shaken. How did these black-clothed men know that Sinosaurus obtained something in the Changbai mountain? Even the National Security Bureau and Sword Pavilion did not know about this. Just what kind of background did the other party have? Tang Jing took a step forward and calmly said, "We do not know what you are talking about." "If you don't know, then let's see if he can remind you." The black-clothed man waved his hand and another black-clothed man walked out with an old woman. "Shaman." The 3 of them were shocked. The other party had actually captured the shaman. Previously, the shaman had suffered a great loss at the hands of Tang Jing and had become a fool. They did not expect that she would fall into the hands of these people. The shaman's eyes had already regained consciousness. It was clear that the black-clothed man had used some unknown method to heal her. Her eyes were spitting fire as she looked at Tang Zheng and the other two. Her voice was hoarse as she shouted, "It's them. The thing you want is in their hands." The three people's expressions suddenly changed. Sinosaurus angrily said, "Shaman, not only did you want to harm my family, but now you instigated these criminals to come to my house. What do you mean by this? You broke my shaman's technique. I will make you beg for death," the shaman viciously said. Tang Zheng frowned. He had let her live, but she did not repent. She had even caused trouble for them. She really deserved to die. "Now you have nothing to say. Hand over the thing and I'll let you live," the black-clothed man aggressively said. "I don't have what you want. Even if I did, I wouldn't give it to you." Sinosaurus raised his neck and said without backing down, "Stubborn. It seems like you don't even care about your family." The black-clothed man waved his hand and several people escorted out three people who were tied up like rice dumplings. Their bodies were clearly injured. The three people's mouths were stuffed with strips of cloth so they could not speak. But when they looked at Sinosaurus and the other two people, their eyes were filled with anxiety. "Grandfather, father, mother." Sinosaurus turned pale with fright. His eyes looked like they were about to spit fire. "What are you doing? Hurry up and let my family go. Hand over the thing. Otherwise each one of them will die in front of you. That feeling will be unforgettable for the rest of your life," the black-clothed man cruelly said. "I don't even know what you're talking about. What can I give you?" "You remind him." The black-clothed man pointed at the shaman and said. The shaman arrogantly took a few steps forward. She fearfully glanced at Tang Zheng and arrogantly said, "Sinosaurus, you have a magic weapon in your body. Hurry up and hand it over." Magic weapon. The three people were shocked. The shaman had actually discovered this before. It was really unexpected. Originally, when the shaman treated Sinosaurus, she had already discovered this. But with her cultivation, she was unable to summon that magic weapon. That magic weapon had already merged with Sinosaurus' flesh and blood. If she wanted to obtain the magic weapon, she had to wait for Sinosaurus to die. She had always been looking forward to Do Long's death, and in the end she even instigated the villagers to kill them all, so that they could completely cut off all hope and let Do Long die a little faster, so that she could take the magic treasure for herself. Or she could wait for the family to leave and get rid of them in an unknown place. Then she could kill them and take the magic weapon. In short, she had a lot of plans. But she did not expect Tang Zheng to appear halfway and ruin her plans. She almost died in Tang Zheng's hands. Although she knew that by helping the black-clothed man, she would not have the chance to obtain the magic weapon. But she still helped the black-clothed man. Because as long as she could strike Sinosaurus and the others, she would be very happy. Chapter 589. Seeing that the shaman had seen through the mystery, the three people's expressions changed slightly. These people really came for the mountain-shattering meteor hammer, but judging from their attire, they were not from the Sword Pavilion or the National Security Bureau. Tang Zheng suddenly had an idea and asked, "Are you from the island nation?" The black-clothed men were slightly startled. They could already hide their identities, but they were still seen through by the other party. This was unexpected. "You are not ordinary villagers?" the black-clothed man asked with a murderous look. "Humph, the people of the island nation dare to come to Wuxia and behave atrociously. If you don't change your character, then today you will not be able to return," Tang Zheng said resolutely. "Since you don't know life from death, then there is no need to talk nonsense with you. Do it, kill their families first," the black-clothed man ordered, and three katanas quietly lit up in the night, stabbing towards Sinosaurus's family. The three people's mouths were stuffed with cloth, and their eyes were wide open in fear. They kept struggling, but they were powerless. "How dare you, I will kill you," Sinosaurus roared furiously. With a flash of light in his hand, the mountain-shattering meteor hammer flew out of his hand and flew towards the black-clothed man who intended to commit murder. At the same time, the other black-clothed men swung their katanas and rushed towards Tang Zheng and the other two. Kacha. With a crisp sound, the katana was smashed into pieces by the mountain-shattering meteor hammer. The attack of the mountain-shattering meteor hammer did not decrease and smashed into the black-clothed man's head. Like a watermelon falling from a high altitude, brain matter flew everywhere, blood spurted out, and the headless corpse fell to the ground with a thud. Sinosaurus rushed towards the black-clothed man like a tiger coming down the mountain. Tang Zheng and Martial were even faster. Like two ghosts, they quietly rushed to the front of the black-clothed man and attacked like lightning. Two black-clothed men flew out and crashed into the wall. They immediately died and blood spilled all over the ground. In one exchange, the black-clothed men lost 3 of their men. Immediately, cries of alarm sounded from all directions. Baka, cut them all into pieces. The remaining 10 or so black-clothed men rushed towards Tang Jing and the other 2 like hungry wolves hunting for food. The 3 of them were obviously not afraid. Other than Sinosaurus, who was a little unfamiliar with his movements, Tang Jing and Martial were completely at ease. Most of these black-clothed men were xianxia martial artists, but the highest was only a 5th-grade xianxia martial artist. They were far from being a match for Tang Jing. Since the other party was from an island nation, Tang Jing did not show any mercy. He unleashed killing moves one after another, causing the black-clothed men to fall to the ground and die miserably. The courtyard was filled with the smell of blood, and the aura of death shrouded the courtyard, causing people to be terrified. The 3 people from the Dou clan were already stunned and unable to move. Even the shaman was scared silly. She originally thought that the black-clothed man was already a ruthless character, but now she understood that these 3 youngsters were even more ruthless. They showed a maturity and ruthlessness that did not match their age. The men in black were finally afraid. These people were not the small fries they had imagined. This time they had kicked a steel plate. Quickly retreat. The leader screamed and retreated in panic, trying to escape, but how could Tang Jing let him do as he wished? Like a shadow, he followed closely behind. The battle soul sword pierced out, aiming for the opponent's back. The opponent was a 5th-grade xianxia martial artist. His strength was not weak. Feeling the biting cold killing intent behind him, he casually grabbed the stunned shaman and pushed her back. The shaman crashed into Battle Soul and the sword tip pierced through her body. The shaman looked at the bleeding sword tip on her chest. Her eyes were about to explode. Her head tilted and her life was cut off. Tang Jing did not have the slightest bit of mercy. Last time he had let her go, but who would have thought that she would not change? She deserved to die. After the Battle Soul pierced through the shaman's body, it did not slow down and caught up with the leader. The 2 of them were like candied haws being strung together. The black-clothed man's eyes widened in despair as he let out an unwilling roar. He took out something from his bosom and threw it towards the sky. Bang! With an explosion, a strangely shaped firework bloomed in the sky. Damn it, this is a signal. Damn it, even when you are about to die you still don't stop. Tang Jing pulled out Battle Soul and the 2 corpses fell to the ground. The other black-clothed men were also wiped out by Martial and Sinosaurus. Especially Sinosaurus, who was still a little unfamiliar with it at first, but later on he gradually became proficient and crazily waved the mountain-shattering meteor hammer. Although his cultivation was not as good as the black-clothed men, he had the support of the mountain-shattering meteor hammer. In addition, because he hated the other party for threatening him with his family, his fighting strength was pushed to the peak. Many black-clothed men died under his mountain-shattering meteor hammer. The black-clothed men had been completely wiped out, but Sinosaurus still did not stop. He crazily waved the mountain-shattering meteor hammer, and in the end he loudly shouted, "Kill, kill, kill, kill." His body was also dyed with the blood of his enemies, which was extremely terrifying. The Dou family finally woke up from their dream. Looking at the crazy Sinosaurus, Mother Dou was the first to uncontrollably cry. She threw herself at Sinosaurus and screamed, "Son, what's wrong with you? Don't scare me, Wu. Be careful." Seeing that, Tang Jing immediately grabbed Sinosaurus's arm. Otherwise, in the next second, Sinosaurus would accidentally hurt his mother. "Lao, wake up!" Tang Jing roared loudly. It was like a huge bell shaking people's eardrums to the point of pain. Sinosaurus was startled and stopped. The madness in his eyes decreased sharply and he gradually regained his clarity. When he saw his anxious and frightened family, he was overjoyed. He hugged them and cheered, "You guys are fine, that's great, that's great." 2 streams of hot tears flowed from his eyes. Who says men don't cry? That's because they haven't been hurt. Just now he was really frightened and angry. Don't look at how Sinosaurus was usually rough and careless. His family was his lifeblood. If anyone dared to harm his family, he would fight them to the death. The family hugged each other and cried. They had never experienced such a terrifying thing. After surviving a disaster, they had mixed feelings. "Son, you guys killed someone. What should we do?" Mother Dou was at a loss. She suddenly said with a resolute expression, "You guys hurry up and run. When the police come, I'll take responsibility. Just say that I killed them." Old Man Dou and Dou Jiang nodded at the same time and said, "Yes, listen to your mother. You guys hurry up and leave. We'll take care of this matter." Sinosaurus resolutely said, "I dare to take responsibility for my actions. How can I, Sinosaurus, be a coward? You guys are still young. You still have a long life ahead of you. How can you be ruined like this? The Dou family said with unquestionable hearts. Don't worry. I'll take care of this matter. No one will be arrested. Tang Jing interrupted their worries and said, You. Old Man Dou and the others clearly didn't believe him, but someone died and it's not just one. You guys can relax. These are all people from an island nation. Back then they invaded our country and now they're here to cause trouble. They deserve to die. Tang Jing comforted. Second brother, send them back to their homes in the city. Don't come back here. I'll stay here to take care of this matter. Can I really? Sinosaurus's heart was apprehensive. Tang Jing patted his shoulder and said, Don't worry. I'll take care of everything. Sinosaurus thought about how Tang Jing knew the National Security Bureau and couldn't help but believe him. Moreover, after experiencing such a battle, if the Dou family continued to stay, it would definitely leave a psychological shadow. The Dou family simply packed up and left the village in the middle of the night. In the middle of the night, Tang Jing and Martial sat at the entrance of the courtyard. Behind them was a messy battlefield with many corpses lying everywhere. Dong dong dong. Hurried footsteps sounded out. A group of black-clothed men completely blended into the night as they quickly approached the quiet courtyard. A murderous aura assaulted their faces. Tang Jing and Martial were calm and collected. They squinted their eyes and closed their eyes to rest. This time the other party's background is not small. Martial calmly said. Scared? I still don't know the word, scared. Martial coldly said. Then let's start a massacre. The people of the island nation have never given up and have always coveted our treasures. This time they must have come for the treasures. A small country actually dares to covet our treasures. They deserve to die. Tang Jing said with a murderous look. Although the treasure has nothing to do with me, I am still a little interested in killing the devil. Martial said. I didn't expect you to be so warm-hearted. You have a good view of the overall situation. Tang Jing joked. Martial coldly snorted, declining to comment. The sound of footsteps arrived in the blink of an eye. Not long later, the black-clothed men surrounded the courtyard. Smelling the faint smell of blood in the air, and then looking at the two people sitting at the entrance, the black-clothed men all stopped in their tracks. An old man with a white beard walked out. He was not wearing a mask and between his brows was a cold killing intent. He was short, but his aura was extremely strong. The other tall black-clothed men were like 3-year-old children in front of him. Tang Jing's pupils suddenly constricted. He stared at the old man and softly spat out 2 words, Grand Master. This old man was actually a Grand Master martial artist. Although Tang Jing could not see his exact cultivation level, but judging from the other party's aura, he definitely would not be wrong. More than one Grand Master had lost to Tang Jing, so he was not afraid of the Grand Master. He casually glanced at the other party and said, Is everyone here? Who are you? Where are my people? The old man also knew wuxia, so he asked without any trace of politeness. I am from wuxia. As for your people, yes, they are lying in the courtyard. They are lonely on the road to the Yellow Springs, waiting for you to accompany them. Tang Jing said. Baka, you dare to go against us? Hehe, I've already killed them. Do you think I wouldn't dare? Tang Jing asked in ridicule. It seems that you have obtained the magic treasure. That's why you are so unbridled. This time, not only do I want your lives, I also want the magic treasure. The old man said. Then come and get it. Tang Jing raised the war soul sword that had been defeated on his leg. Let's see if you have the ability. Go. The old man roared and took the lead to rush out. However, just as he took a step forward, his figure disappeared. Interesting. Tang Jing narrowed his eyes and stared at the vast night sky. He could not find any trace of the old man. Suddenly, a katana appeared behind Tang Jing without any warning and pierced towards his back. Clang. Tang Jing did not move. Behind him, intense sparks lit up. The other party's sneak attack had failed. Chapter 590. What kind of kung fu is this? Tang Jing asked curiously. Ninjutsu. An old voice sounded. The voice was erratic, making people unable to determine where it came from. Ninjutsu? Tang Jing muttered in his heart. What was the difference between this and illusion? In fact, ninjutsu and illusion were really inextricably linked. In ancient times, the island nation was just a vassal state of wuxia, a small place, and the whole country worshipped wuxia, and they even sent people across the ocean to wuxia to learn. At that time, the cultivators of wuxia were popular, and the island nation as a barbarian land was shocked by the cultivation technique, so they wanted to learn this immortal technique. However, most of the people of the island nation were uncivilized, slow in thinking, and unable to understand the profound meaning of cultivation. Many people's wisdom was exhausted, and they only learned a little. Later, the cultivators of wuxia were expelled to Tianwei, and the island nation couldn't learn even if they wanted to. Later, Kung Fu was carried forward, so the island nation also focused on learning Kung Fu, forming the popular and everlasting Bushido in the island nation today. As for some of the techniques learned in the past, they were also integrated into Bushido, forming a new sect called ninjutsu, and the people who practiced ninjutsu were called ninjas. Ninjutsu was more mysterious than ordinary Bushido. Not everyone could learn it, but it was secretly passed down from generation to generation. After hundreds of years of inheritance, ninjutsu was much more advanced than before, and some of them were already considered kung fu. Therefore, the old man opposite him was half a step into the threshold of a cultivator, but his strength couldn't only be judged by the level of a cultivator. In short, this person was definitely the most troublesome person from the island nation that Tang Jing had ever encountered. These ninjas got the information that there was a magic weapon in the northeast of Wuxia, so they disguised themselves and sneaked into Wuxia, just to take the magic weapon for themselves. Although their ninjutsu could be considered as spells, they didn't have any magical weapons after all. Their power was greatly reduced and it was difficult for them to be elegant. If he had a treasure that complemented his ninjutsu would definitely reach a higher level. However, the magical equipment had already been taken by Tang Jing and Sinosaurus, and they were one step too late. You're lucky to be able to die under ninjutsu. Give me your life. The old man roared, and the katana silently appeared in front of Tang Jing's chest. Moreover, he chopped down 3 times in a row, continuously, and could not be underestimated. Tang Jing frowned and said, "Since you like to play hide and seek, I'll play with you." As soon as he finished speaking, the katana struck empty air. Tang Jing's figure was nowhere to be seen. He and the old man had disappeared without a trace. The other black-clothed men couldn't help but exclaim as they shook their heads in disbelief. "Impossible, this is a high-level ninjutsu, how can he know it? Is this a high-level ninjutsu? Then it seems that your ninjutsu is only SOSO. Tang Jing's disdainful voice rang out. "Audacious, you dare to insult ninjutsu." The black-clothed men angrily shouted, wishing that they could immediately pull out their swords and cut Tang Jing into 1,000 pieces. However, they couldn't find any trace of Tang Jing. "It's just an insignificant skill," Tang Jing coldly said. Illusions were not very profound techniques for cultivators, but the opponent's ninjutsu was clearly born out of illusions. It only had the appearance, but it didn't have the essence. Although ordinary people couldn't see the two of them, when Tang Jing revolved his chi, his perception greatly increased, and he finally found a clue. This ninjutsu had obvious mana fluctuations. Ordinary people and martial artists couldn't sense it, but Tang Jing could clearly feel it. With a thought, he determined the old man's position. With a wave of his hand, the war soul sword pierced out. Voila, the air spread out in all directions, leaving behind only the power of the sword. When the old man saw that Tang Jing had also become invisible, he didn't panic. Instead, he was wild with joy. He subconsciously thought that this was the effect of the mysterious treasure, so he couldn't wait to take the treasure for himself. At that time, his ninjutsu would definitely reach a higher level, and he might even be promoted to the top of the island nation's ninja master. As the sword and blade clashed, the air exploded with bright sparks, but the others still couldn't see the two figures. They could only hear the sound of fighting rising and falling. In the blink of an eye, the two had already exchanged more than 10 moves. Although Tang Jing's cultivation was only at the 7th level of Inidia, with the support of the War Soul Sword, his fighting strength soared. He didn't even need the 4 symbols venerables to contend against a master. In fact, when fighting with this old man, Tang Jing had taken advantage of him. This was because the other party had deliberately used ninjutsu and not martial arts, giving Tang Jing an opportunity to take advantage of. Tang Jing's comprehension and understanding of magic far surpassed his opponents, so wanting to use ninjutsu to defeat Tang Jing was purely a fantasy. The battle between the two sides became more and more intense. Occasionally there would be sounds of collisions in the air, and occasionally blood would spurt out. Everyone held their breaths with rapt attention as they stared fixedly at the blood, and all of them guessed exactly who was injured. The atmosphere of the battlefield became more and more intense. It was so oppressive that it made it hard for people to breathe. Many people's hearts were in their throats. She knew how powerful Tang Jing was, but this opponent was not someone who was easy to deal with. Wu knew that she was not a match for the old man, so who would be the victor? The old man's aura gradually became chaotic. He gradually discovered some clues. Every time he thought that his attacks were flawless, they would be seen through by Tang Zheng. It was as if Tang Zheng could see through his whereabouts. Tang Zheng's attacks also became sharper and sharper, causing him to be unable to defend against them. He was surrounded by danger, and a few wounds had already appeared on his body, causing blood to flow out. However, he was unable to harm Tang Zheng in the slightest. This kind of situation was unprecedented, causing him to feel incomparably depressed and terrified. Your ninjutsu has already lost its effect. Hurry up and show yourself. Tang Zheng did not play hide and seek with the other party anymore. With a loud shout, he thrusted out his sword, his aura firmly locking onto the old man. Yes, even though the old man had concealed his figure, he was still firmly locked onto by Tang Zheng's aura. No matter how he moved, that trace of aura never left his body. This feeling was extremely mysterious, causing the old man's expression to change greatly. Suddenly, pa. The air around the old man exploded violently like firecrackers. The old man's figure suddenly stopped and gradually revealed itself. The old man was shocked. He looked around and screamed, "What's going on? How could this be?" The other black-clothed men also looked as if they had seen a ghost. Ninjutsu was a high-level secret technique in their eyes. How could it fail? The corner of Tang Zheng's mouth raised and he laughed proudly. "I already told you ninjutsu is just an insignificant skill." Although Tang Zheng did not know the origin of ninjutsu, he could tell that there were many flaws in ninjutsu. The mana fluctuations were too obvious, and it was easy for an expert like Tang Zheng to find clues. Therefore the old man tried his best to use ninjutsu, but in Tang Zheng's eyes he was like a transparent person with nowhere to hide. With the ninjutsu failing, the old man panicked and exclaimed, "You are definitely not a cultivator who has just become a cultivator, but a cultivator who has been cultivating for a long time. Who exactly are you?" If it was in the past, if the old man met a real cultivator, he would be happy. Because in his whole life he hoped to improve his ninjutsu to the next level, but he knew that ninjutsu had reached the end, unless there was a new opportunity such as becoming a cultivator. The old man was very clear about the origin of ninjutsu. Although he did not admit it verbally, he knew that ninjutsu had a lot of room for improvement after incorporating the essence of magic. But the key point was that Tang Zheng's strength was too strong, and he had no way to defeat him. Instead, his opponent took advantage of every opportunity, making his hope like flowers in a mirror and the moon in the water. Hearing the other party's question, Tang Zheng smiled and did not say a word. War Spirit slashed out, and the old man hurriedly responded. Suddenly, War Spirit flashed, and a dark sword light wrapped around the katana. With a kacha sound, the katana broke into two, and War Spirit slashed at the old man's neck. The old man's neck was cold and he staggered back. Finally, he fell to the ground and luckily escaped the danger of being beheaded. War Spirit flew past his scalp, cutting off a few strands of hair and quietly falling down, causing the old man's back to break out in cold sweat. "Humph, consider yourself lucky, but this time you may not be able to escape," Tang Zheng said coldly and was about to attack again, but heard heavy footsteps approaching from afar and shouted, "Tang Zheng, stay your sword." Tang Zheng's movements came to an abrupt stop, and he turned his head to look in the direction of the person. "Director Su, you want to save him?" Tang Zheng asked curiously. He was not surprised by Su Yingtian's arrival as he had expected. Of course, the case he did this time must be dealt with by the National Security Bureau so that he would not get into trouble. Moreover, he believed that the fireworks signal from the island nation people must have alarmed the nearby National Security Bureau. Su Yingtian had been painstakingly searching for the island nation people, so how could he let go of this great opportunity? Tang Zheng had calculated all of this, but he did not calculate Su Yingtian's attitude and reaction. "Don't misunderstand, I'm not saving him. Do you know who this person is?" Su Yingtian asked. "I don't care who he is. If he dares to come to Huaxia and show off his strength, then he deserves to die," Tang Zheng said without any trace of politeness. You have this kind of awareness which is worthy of praise, but there are some things that we can pursue for greater benefits. Wouldn't it be too easy for him to just kill him?" Su Yingtian said with a smile like an old fox. Tang Zheng seemed to be deep in thought and said, "Oh, then tell me who he is first." "This person is the island nation's Bushido, but this is not the most exciting part. He has another identity, he is the island nation's emperor's younger brother." "The emperor's younger brother, which is also the royal family?" Tang Zheng's eyes widened. Nowadays, pictures of the island nation's royal princesses are often circulated on the internet. As for the other members of the royal family, they are quite mysterious and ordinary people do not know. This person is actually the emperor's younger brother, then his identity is really not ordinary. Hee hee, you killed the emperor's younger brother. In less than 3 days then you will really be famous. Su Yingtian joked. It's just a small country, what's so great about the royal family? Tang Zheng curled his lips. Obviously he did not like these nobles and did not have any respect for them. Moreover, didn't he save a Swedish princess from Europe? Chapter 591. Su Yingtian rolled his eyes. Ordinary people were in awe of nobles, but a freak like Tang Zheng didn't even put the royal family in his eyes. Su Yingtian couldn't help feeling fortunate that his strategy back then was wise. He did not use his authority to suppress the other party, but chose to cooperate instead. Xing Feng was too self-righteous, which was why he and Tang Zheng were like fire and water. When the other people from the island nation heard Tang Zheng's words, they all shouted, "Baka!" The old man's face turned ashen as he roared, "Audacious! How dare you be rude to the royal family!" Tang Zheng raised his sword and pierced it towards the old man, causing the latter to retreat in a panic. But with a turn of the sword he stopped his attack. Tang Zheng smiled with his eyes narrowed as he looked at the old man and asked, "Do you still think that I don't dare to kill you?" "You." The old man's face turned red as he was left speechless. Tang Zheng ignored the old man and turned to Su Yingtian. "If you don't kill him, how are you going to deal with him?" "Haha, as a member of the royal family of an island nation, he must know a lot of information. This is a big fish and it's not easy to catch such a big fish. You've just joined the National Security Bureau, and you've already made such a great contribution. Congratulations." Su Yingtian chuckled. Tang Zheng rolled his eyes and saw through the old man's thoughts. Su Yingtian took the initiative to give the credit to Tang Zheng, which meant that he wanted to add 10 points to the relationship between Tang Zheng and the National Security Bureau. Regarding this, Tang Zheng did not have any objections. "This old man is stubborn. Are you sure you can pry open his mouth?" Tang Zheng asked in a solemn voice. Su Yingtian confidently smiled. "You have to believe that the National Security Bureau has been established for so many years. It's not for nothing." Tang Zheng thought for a long time and said, "Since you've come forward, I'll give you face. However, it's too annoying to see so many people strutting around wuxia." Before he finished speaking, Tang Zheng attacked. Like a bolt of lightning he shuttled through the island nation people. Poof, poof, conferring a marquee at the sight of blood. Blood spurted out from their necks like small fountains. Island nation people covered their necks and looked at each other in disbelief. Their eyes were filled with deep despair. Bang bang bang, except for the old man, all the people from the island nation fell to the ground and stopped breathing. It was as if Tang Zheng had never left his original position. Even the blade of the War Soul sword did not have the slightest trace of blood. This series of attacks was too incisive, dazzling and overwhelming. When the old man wanted to save him, he found that it was already too late. His eyes were bloodshot as he roared, "I will kill you." Tang Zheng hooked his finger at the old man and said, "Welcome, but next time you won't be so lucky. Who do you think will die in whose hands?" The old man suddenly froze and was speechless. After fighting with Tang Zheng for so long, he had clearly realized the gap between them. If he wanted to kill Tang Zheng, it would be harder than ascending to the heavens. However, if Tang Zheng wanted to get rid of him, it would not take much effort. He was completely unable to accept such an outcome. His head drooped as if he had lost his parents. However, the flames that were about to spurt out of his eyes showed his inner feelings. Su Yingtian did not stop Tang Zheng from killing. The lives of some shrimp soldiers and crab generals were insignificant to him. Moreover, from Tang Zheng's decisive killing, he also had a new understanding of Tang Zheng. He echoed, "Wuxia is indeed no longer the sick man of East Asia that can be bullied. Since they dare to come, then of course we will make them pay the price in blood." The old man fiercely glared at Su Yingtian, but he remained indifferent as if he did not see it. However, why would these people come to this remote village? Su Yingtian's eyes turned as he suspiciously muttered to himself. Tang Zheng's heart trembled. Could it be that he had found out about the mountain-shattering meteor hammer? Sinosaurus's strength was still weak, so he had to bide his time to prevent others from coveting it. In the future, when his cultivation was high enough, it would not be too late to announce it to the public. Tang Zheng did not bat an eyelid as he calmly said, "Who knows? The Japanese have never needed a specific reason to do things. They only do it on a whim." "Nonsense. Our people came to this village because they found traces of a magic treasure and not because of a whim," the old man refuted. Tang Zheng's gaze turned cold. Would this old thing die if he spoke less? Fortunately, the advanced troops of the island nation had all died, so the old man did not know about the mountain-shattering meteor hammer. "Magic treasure?" Su Yingtian's heart moved. You really came for the magic treasure. The old man heard this and jokingly said, it seems that you know even less than us. Haha, then don't think that you can get a word out of me. Ah, is that so? Then we'll see. Su Yingtian said unconcernedly. Director Su, we will take our leave first. We will have to trouble you to clean up this mess. Tang Jing pointed to the courtyard and said, don't worry. Isn't that what the National Security Bureau does? Su Yingtian said casually. Tang Jing and Wu left the village that night and met up with the Dou clan. They told them that the matter had been resolved and that they did not need to worry. Although the Dou clan was skeptical, they did not have a better way. Moreover, they did not see the police coming to arrest them, so they gradually believed it. However, when Tang Jing warned them not to return to the village, they agreed without hesitation. They no longer had any lingering feelings for that village. However, the impact of this matter on the family was not small. After many days, they gradually forgot about this nightmare. Since school had already started, Tang Jing, Sinosaurus, and Wu took a flight to the capital the next day. Sinosaurus's return made the atmosphere in room 502 lively again. They had a good meal together and were very happy. Fortunately, Sinosaurus's mental endurance was not bad. He did not show too much abnormality and did not arouse the suspicion of others. At night, Tang Jing left Wu Wu and quietly sneaked into the underground of the Imperial City. Before the new year, an earthquake occurred in the Imperial City, which affected the nerves of all parties. During that time, the Imperial Palace was loose on the outside and tight on the inside. However, there was no movement and no useful information was found, so all the spies were withdrawn. This made it convenient for Tang Jing to enter the underground of the Imperial City and meet with the five-clawed golden dragon. During the winter vacation, he had accumulated too many questions to ask the five-clawed golden dragon. When he walked in the direction of the five-clawed golden dragon, the dragon chi in his body surged. Back then in the Southern Sea Dragon Palace, the dragon chi in his body was emitted. The powerful dragon might cause many sea demons to crawl on the ground, not daring to move at all. That kind of domineering aura made Tang Jing feel as if he had fallen into a dream. For the first time in his life, he experienced the power of dragon chi. At first, the dragon chi in his body was accumulated after absorbing the five-clawed golden dragon's chi and consuming the dragon yuan pill. However, when his dragon god art broke through to the second stage, a lifelike two-clawed golden dragon appeared in his mind, and a golden dragon head was branded on his forehead. It was full of dragon might, and dragon chi gradually formed in his body. Previously, his dragon chi would not increase on its own, but ever since he cultivated to the second level of the dragon god technique, his dragon chi gradually increased. This was something he had never expected. The dragon god technique actually had such a divine power. However, the dragon chi had always been deliberately suppressed by him so others could not sense it. Otherwise, when ordinary people faced this dragon chi, they would really feel suffocated like Mount Tai. At this moment, the dragon chi was surging. This unprecedented change caused Tang Jing to involuntarily frown. When he walked to the door, he found that the five-clawed golden dragon was staring at him with wide eyes. Your dragon god technique has actually been cultivated to the second level. The five-clawed golden dragon impatiently spoke first. Tang Jing looked straight in front of the five-clawed golden dragon, and the dragon chi in his body involuntarily gushed out. In an instant his aura suddenly changed. Although his body was countless times smaller than the five-clawed golden dragon at this moment, his aura was like a rainbow, giving people an illusion. It was as if the gap between him and the five-clawed golden dragon wasn't that big. That invisible aura made up for the gap between the two of them. Yes, the dragon god technique has reached the second level. A double-clawed golden dragon appeared in my mind, and there is a dragon head imprint in the center of my forehead. Tang Jing activated his power, and the double-clawed golden dragon in his mind began to churn, as if it was riding the clouds in the sky. His forehead emitted a golden light, and the golden dragon imprint shone brightly. Dragon seal. The five-clawed golden dragon cried out in alarm. His eyes were wide open like two large lanterns. How did you manage to cultivate the dragon seal? Tang Jing looked suspiciously at the five-clawed golden dragon's huge reaction. The five-clawed golden dragon had always been calm, but why did it look like it had seen a ghost at this moment? There must be a demon behind this abnormality. Dragon seal? Is my imprint called dragon seal? Tang Jing touched his forehead, but he didn't feel the slightest bit of difference. This is the dragon seal, the symbol of our dragon clan. Look at me. The five-clawed golden dragon said excitedly. Suddenly, a golden light flashed, and a mark appeared in the center of its forehead. A huge dragon head impressively appeared in front of its eyes. It was extremely powerful, many times more powerful than Tang Jing's dragon seal. This was the first time Tang Jing saw the 5-clawed golden dragon's dragon seal. He curiously opened his eyes wide. When the dragon seal appeared, the dragon's might multiplied, making people feel like they were bowing down to it. Mighty. Tang Jing praised from the bottom of his heart. The 5-clawed golden dragon ignored his praise and asked seriously, "Tell me, how did you, a human, manage to cultivate the dragon seal?" Tang Jing rolled his eyes and asked, "Can't humans cultivate the dragon seal?" "Of course not, this is the unique symbol of the dragon clan. You are not a dragon clan, so how can you cultivate the dragon seal?" The 5-clawed golden dragon said grumpily. Tang Jing shrugged and said, "You ask me, how would I know? I still want you to give me an answer." "No, there must be a problem somewhere. Even if you are a celestial, I have never heard of a celestial being able to cultivate the dragon seal." The 5-clawed golden dragon shook its head, its big eyes were filled with disbelief. "Tell me, when did your dragon seal appear?" The 5-clawed golden dragon didn't give up and asked. "When?" Tang Jing scratched his head and suddenly remembered, "It was in the desert, a few days before the new year. Why did you suddenly break through at that time?" The dragon god arts was a cultivation method that was difficult at first but then easy. Originally, he was able to cultivate the first layer successfully. The 5-clawed golden dragon didn't expect him to break through to the second layer so quickly. The tree of life once again saw the light of day. "I absorbed the tree of life's spiritual chi.